Good evening. My name is Karen Henderson, and I am the General Manager at Westborough TV. I am pleased that you are joining us tonight for a Q&A session with Superintendent of Schools, Mrs. Amber Bock. Mrs. Bock called me last week to ask if Westborough TV would be willing to host a Q&A where she would answer as many parent questions as possible about the return to school plan. It is obviously an uncertain time for all of us, and I'd say, based on some of the questions, that certainly emotions are running a bit high. We certainly know and appreciate that our administration and school faculty have been considering, planning, grappling, worrying about all of these educational and emotional decisions right along with us parents. So here's how the next couple of hours are going to work. I'm going to read questions that were submitted by many of you online. I've gone through some of those, most of those, and separated them somewhat into categories to try and just keep the conversation flowing a little bit better. I won't be posing any questions that we received that weren't pertaining to the school reopening plan, so we're specifically focused on that. And as we talk, we may receive some more questions, and I will do my best to try to take some of those in and incorporate those into our conversation. To be clear, this is not a debate. It is not gotcha journalism. I know it's a difficult topic, but it's simply intended to be an informational forum through which you can hear some answers to the questions some of you have about Westborough's return to school plan. So with that, I'm going to get right to it. Good evening, Mrs. Bock.
Good evening, Karen. Thank you for hosting. I think it put a lot of pressure on you to sort all the questions. I was watching them come in. I think you've probably spent a lot more time actually looking at them because I really got through about a third of them. So one of the things we agreed is that I'll do my best to both spontaneously and comfortably answer questions. If we hit one where I don't have kind of the depth of information somebody might want, I might say, can we skip and return? There's over 200 questions. So our goal is, I think, for you and I to serve the public to try to answer as many as possible. And you can push me through a question like, okay, that's enough, let's move on. So I don't feel like you can push me around, and you can tell me however you need to move on. So we'll dive in. I'll let you guide the whole thing, and we'll see how we do.
That's great. Okay.
Thanks.
Excellent. Sounds good to me. I'm going to give you your one softball of the evening. But what a couple of people wanted to know, when's the first day of school, especially in light of the state commissioner allowing for that 10 days of prep that came out, I think, last week.
Thank you. So that is a good one. I can actually answer that one. The commissioner adjusted the start of school by 10 days, taking 10 student days and giving them to all faculty. So, and they have to be used at the beginning. So the first, he required them to be used at the beginning.
Interesting.
So the first day of school for students will shift to September 15th.
Okay, well.
So that has to be officially voted by school committee. So, you know, there's two things that will happen. He announced it. We're looking at the adjustment, and the school committee will vote it on their final proposal as kind of the accepted new school calendar.
Great. And just, you mentioned the school committee will do that. You know when their next meeting is, just to let people know?
So the next meeting is August 12th. The actual deadline to submit to the state, all our final planning is actually August 10th, but we'll submit in Westborough on the 12th after they review it and give it their approval.
Great. Okay, so just in case, I think most people are pretty aware, but let's get everybody started at the same level here. So in case people don't know, this is my question, not a parent question, although I am a parent also. But just give people a brief overview of kind of the process for these return to school plans. You know, what kind of edict came down from the state, and then how we ended up with 3 options. That would be helpful.
Sure. No, thank you. So the state, at the closing of school in June, when students had their last days, started the next step for opening. And we received guidance that all districts in Massachusetts needed to fully develop 3 plans, with the fully anticipated thought that we might move through all of them across the span of the year. We certainly were clear in the draft of our plan that we anticipate we might well leverage all 3 of them during the school year, but the state didn't count fairly. It's actually 4 full plans because, one, the state initial directive to us was to develop a plan to return all students distanced at 3 feet, utilizing as much of our building as we had to make that happen, to bring back all students. We discarded that depth of planning initially, and we can come back and talk about that later when we talk about why hybrid, but that was the first plan. A lot of superintendents and districts pushed back on that when they looked at their capacity to bring back students and faculty safely at that distance, and we as a leadership team moved away from that quickly in terms of feeling like that's where we're going to put our emphasis. The second plan that the state wanted to develop was a hybrid model where you were bringing back a split cohort of students in some type of rotation that the district would develop so that you could lower the impact of the number of students in space at the building level, and then also get more additional spacing in rooms and passing and all the type of impact of like having half your number of kids. So that represents the hybrid that we're required to develop instructionally. The third model was for a selection to do all remote, 100% remote. What would that look like? And what are the guidelines circled around that that are different than what we did in the spring? And the state put out a whole range of additional guidelines for how school has to look different in the fall, regardless of model, when we return to instruction. The fourth that they left then as kind of unarticulated was the standalone remote, where families who decide to not return their child to school and to work remotely is this standalone remote, which also has to be fully developed. So there's 4 complete models at play. Okay. There's a second part to that question. Then you want to talk about how we did that planning in Westborough and what kind of how we've tackled it. Do you want me to?
Right. So yeah, that would be good. I mean, there's a little bit of how we developed those plans.
Yeah, definitely.
So just to back up for 1 second, that initial set of plans, were those sent to the DESE already, like on a 7/31 deadline?
No, great question. So the draft plan that we released, the reason we have that fully developed draft in terms of at least the scaffold of our planning at Westborough is because that is what we submitted to the state. They had a form that goes with it where we had to fill in a bunch of additional detail, but it's basically pulls from the report, and we attached that report, which is kind of Westborough's most current proposal before the school committee for opening.
Okay. And is that public right now?
That is public. Yep, okay. It's posted on the website. It's posted in the school committee folder and has been submitted to the state.
Perfect. Okay. And yeah, how have we been developing all of those plans? And this is coming, again, this is from a parent. How have our teachers been involved in the planning for the 3 options? As parents, we care about our teachers and want to know how their input, not just through surveys, but actual conversations, has been incorporated and that they are supportive of the plans.
That's a great question, and I appreciate that our parents are being thoughtful to that. We have really shared relationships. There's a lot of people to involve here. So in Westborough, we wanted to default to what we used before, which we thought served us well in the spring. When we got forced with a kind of unanticipated rapid close to push home, we pulled on our staff to pull them in for quick working groups to design our model. And I would hold Westborough up across the state as one of the few that did it exceptionally well, because we have a faculty that stood up, mapped it out, and worked with us collaboratively on that. So now that we faced needing to design all these models, our plan in Westborough was to try to leverage as many teachers as possible to bring them in to be able to provide feedback and input on the planning. So what we defaulted to was we put out a survey just saying how many people want to help. We had over 150 teachers said they wanted to add in. So that's a lot of people, but we decided to keep as many of them at the table as possible. So we designed 4 working groups: pre-K to 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to 12. And we have a planning committee inclusive of teachers, teacher leaders, and admin, and then a whole additional tier of an additional teacher feedback group so that we could keep all those people that couldn't do all those meetings, as well as people who want to do some of them, in to look at the planning, give us feedback. And there's kind of designed as 2-hour circular meetings where we post a document, we pull it up, we take feedback, we go to breakout groups, we come back. So that's where we are right now, because for us the design is to provide a scaffold of a layout and then to say here's the draft proposal and to get feedback from faculty on all the pieces to make it as solid as possible for each of the 4 models. I think it's important to note that one of the things that we had to do in that work is make some preliminary recommendations, which is where we started. So we made preliminary recommendations. I think we have teachers who felt that they would get to vote what recommendation choice there would be, and I know that there were differing opinions about that. We feel that the feedback that everybody's giving is letting us enhance that planning and improve it. Some of the initial recommendations over going hybrid, I'll talk about when you say why hybrid. I know there's a question about that. So why don't we keep moving and we could come back and talk some more. But we definitely, I had 4 hours of meetings today with over 140 teachers circling in to look at the 100% remote and talk about fleshing it out and continuing to look at our safety protocols. We had quite a robust, intense conversation today. There's a lot of emotion right now running high. Teachers are really feeling pressed to come back against their own family and safety choices and the responsibilities of their job and their passion to work with Westborough students. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm certainly aware that all of that's at play, and there's a lot of us coming together to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly difficult. I guess I would just ask, currently, we know this proposal is out there for the plan. And so it sounds like, just for parents and for teachers, but you're still working through a lot of it. I mean, obviously there are a lot of logistics that have to be worked out, but just overall there are a lot of things that are still in the planning process and in process of receiving feedback and all.
Yeah, I definitely think that, I mean, these are certainly for me, and I will say for all of us, the most challenging thing we've ever faced. So you're trying to create deadlines to give people answers, so both faculty and families know when their children might be in school, can make plans, can organize their lives, against timelines to come up with busing and lunches and transportation and class lists and schedules. And so then there's this active thing at play where people can pick. So there's so many mechanical pieces here that there's some forced deadlines. That said, there's parts of the plan, as I said today to teachers, we are taking your feedback. I really don't, I'm really hoping not to hear from parents that you weren't included. I don't feel that's fair. And I think fair and authentic is what we have to stay. That's what I'm trying to stay. It's why I'm sitting here. And fair and authentic means, to my teachers, I said to them, I hope you would speak up and say that while you might not agree with every decision, you've been at the table. So we really are working to be inclusive. Ideas that were coming forward today, like there's still this active discussion of whether or not Friday should be an all remote for that half-day students. That's a very active discussion and might come to fruition. That's going to upset a whole tier of parents. It might change what teachers need. We're going to have to meet in the middle on all of this, but those are all very active decisions. I'm moving forward with the premise in the proposal around hybrid, and that's where we're pushing back and forth around that detail while we're also then fleshing out how to make each of those the best it can be, with teachers giving us incredibly good ideas.
That's great. All right, so go ahead and talk about the hybrid for a minute. I have lots of questions for all.
Yeah,
I don't want everybody to feel like we're just going to focus on that. I'm
totally.
going to get to a lot of
natural,
pieces, but
it's a natural segue.
But talk about that for a little bit.
And just jump in and push on the question with me, because I think that question that you had a lot of pieces in it.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like, why would we switch, and when will we switch? Are you going to tier me through all of those?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, we initially discarded we started at the premise of the guideline from the commissioner that we were being told to come back all students distanced. We put in a good amount of preliminary work on that, anticipating that that was the directive we were being given, and discarded that early, because we will have to flesh that out as a plan that might eventually, we will someday come back to school, and it will involve some tiered transition back. We discarded that early, and then following the premise of why they started there, which is children need face-to-face instruction. We are a kind of face-to-face profession, and that all professions that need to do the delivery of their job for personal contact have found ways to come back to their jobs, because education of all of those, maybe other than the medical profession where you have such hands-on care, need to be present to interact with their students, to read the work, to do assessments. Ours is a profession of face-to-face time. And we learned that through the spring as we looked at those deficits and people were responding about students needing to return to instruction, not just for their emotional well-being, but for their academic well-being. So The default, if we weren't going to do all in, was to then leverage that hybrid model as an opportunity to both space students, to provide breaks, to have students at home for half the time, while we could also get some present face-to-face instruction, which we thought really could move the needle around learning better than if students are home fully remotely. And while I think it's an uncomfortable conversation, I'm pushing on our staff and they're pushing on me in really dynamic and organic ways. There's windows of learning that close for young learners. Numeracy is very hard to instruct. A parent might not even know what ways to guide the development of the base numeracy system for a young learner, or to teach a kindergartner how to read. Phonological windows begin to shut down and get harder to instruct by the close of second grade. There's an urgency to the work we do, and it's not just social emotional time for kids. Like, there is a craft to what our faculty are trained to do that cannot be delivered remotely. And the fact that we haven't seen students for 6 months and assessed them, for me, I just have to, in the honesty of what my job requires me to do, make a recommendation that says we require some face-to-face time. And yet I feel torn in the same way that we're being pushed on from very thoughtful and caring people on all sides to say there's risks in that, and people want to understand why we would come back together. And I think we've tried to create a model that we feel we can put safety measures in place and do the job that we need to do to instruct children.
Right. So I guess I'll follow it. You answered a few of the questions that I was going to ask during that answer, but wondering about, we had a couple people saying, if numbers start to go back up, and, you need a lot of time to plan. That's why you've got to make these decisions now. There are a lot of things that need to fall in place. But people wondering, is it possible we'll get to September 15th and we're going to be in a position of having to make a different decision? Are we ready to then shift to that? And
yeah, no, that's a yes. I mean, of course, we were clear, and our plan says it if people read it, and our faculty understands as well. That's why we're pushing so hard to develop each model fully. Like today, we spent several hours fleshing out 100% remote, because we need to understand what that looks like, and families need to understand, and we were explicit in that report. This is a full year of school that needs to be a full school day. There is no off day. Students don't want to hear that. I got the survey from the high school students that say, well, we really can't do 6 hours at home. Well, you usually do 6 hours with us, and if we're stuck at home, then we're going to need to have a more robust year. And so we spent time today ironing that out. I think the need to move back and forth between those plans will be guided by more than just us. It'll be guided by the disease factor of what's going on in Westborough, in our state, in the nation, and working with our Board of Health, who are the guiding anchor by law for the implementation of that Board of Health, and they override the school committee. So the school committee could act above the base recommendation of the Board of Health, but they certainly can't override it or ignore it. So if the Board of Health, in looking at the metrics that we put in front of them daily on how many kids are coming down with symptoms, did we have to send anybody home, what's the disease cycle looking like in Westborough, we will be bound by that interaction with them on a day-to-day basis with our nurse leader, bringing that data forward. And if we have to shift gears, we will, and that will be directed to us, not by us. If it wasn't directed to us by the Board of Health and we wanted to act, on it, the school committee would direct that based upon their instincts of, what they think is best at play for the district.
Okay, so it's not, so we're going to start with this hybrid plan, but if things change drastically before, or however drastically that might be, before that September 15th, it's possible that the plan would change. Now, the plan would change, but you're still going to have two strains. You're going to have a hybrid strain where maybe they start out remote, hoping to go back to in-place, and a standalone remote. Is that the current plan?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that right now, as I said, the conversations we're having live with our planning groups of teachers are essential to us, and their voice is at the table for that conversation. And one of the discussions is, should we start the first week remote so that we can build classroom connections and iron out our protocols and do the trainings with students and then bring them back like a little slowly. So like we're taking in these suggestions, the window for this decision making is very tight, but organic around both what faculty feel makes sense, what parents think makes sense, and I guess across all those groups there's a full bell curve of opinions.
Right.
So, you know, it couldn't be messier. I mean, it couldn't be messier, and I just want to say, like, there's no roadmap here. You know, we're just trying to use sound professional judgment and lots of voices at the table.
Right. All right. That sounds great. And that answers a lot of the questions that that people had about kind of how that would look over the course of the next 6 weeks. You know, we had a couple of suggestions from people, like, can we start remote and then see how other districts are managing it after a couple weeks? It had, you know, people talking about, is there a possible scenario where we move fully remote by the first day, but for the first couple weeks, small cohorts of students could have socially distanced masked time with their teachers under tents or outdoors, some sort of temporary outdoor classroom scenario. So it sounds like those are all things you're discussing with.
Yeah, I think the goal for our staff, and you couldn't have a better team than Westborough. I mean, I want people to know, like, we're figuring it out together, and it's hard, but hard is what adult professionals do, right? And so I was reassuring staff today while we were in a very intense conversation in our planning meeting, like, it's okay to push on me and it's okay for me to get upset. I take this really passionately as well, and the responsibilities of what this faces for us is intense. So we're looking at all of that and trying to come up with fully developed plans so we can be nimble and move back and forth. To your comment on outdoor classrooms, I think there's a couple questions in there about that. So let me just say, so we can do a quickie. You know, we are really looking to leverage outdoor space through the fall. You know, faculty naturally are thinking of outdoor circle groups. You know, the wellness teams will get kids outside. We'll have opportunities. I mean, some areas, most of our buildings do have a outdoor classroom. It's kind of a designated area. We'll probably have pop-up outdoor classroom areas. It'll be based on heat and weather, but all natural. We might let kids do some eating lunch outside as we space. Those are all natural responses that our faculty will run at and put in place really, really quickly to make sure that we can, again, we also want to learn, that, as said to someone, I'm happy to do outside. We also then have to leverage the preparation for people to understand the boundaries inside, because it would get cold and we would need to pull inside. So there's all these kind of pieces to figure out.
Okay, so parents make a choice and decide on one of these strains that they want to go with.
Yeah.
Can they opt to switch their students between models, either hybrid to remote or vice versa?
Right.
And are there any exceptions? And how about switching to homeschooling?
Yeah. Lots of questions there. So just make sure I don't miss a piece.
Yep.
So this is one of those things where everybody's torn. And I think as people that say, you know, parents are saying to me, we really care about our faculty, Amber. We want to make sure you're listening to their voice. Well, if I listened to their voice, you wouldn't be able to switch. So just let me be clear. There's lots of tensions here. The faculty doesn't want people to be able to jump back and forth. How can they get continuity for instructional planning? So we can't have it both ways here, everyone. We have to all accept the complexities of what we're facing. Like, I could pretend to ride the fence and say it one way, and then go to the other group and say it another way, but I wouldn't be your superintendent then. The bottom line is the only way we survive this is authentic truth, whether people want to hear it or not. And from my perspective, DESE is defining a lot of this, and they're saying people have the right to swap. Okay, that makes mayhem in my mind instructionally, and I'm speaking for my teaching staff here. All right, everybody wants continuity and consistency. That's what schools are good at. We're expert at it, as a matter of fact. We create continuity in the world and help kids to find routines. And so moving your kid back and forth is going to be a really problematic piece for them. And if you come to us as a parent and work with us on that, we will create natural transition times. DESE has said we need to. We initially drew a line that if you were at the high school and you were going to do the VHS model, we expect you to stay in it all year. DESE says they should have opportunities to switch. So we're now modifying our discussion. We will be encouraging people, yes, and he has now said, the commissioner, people can switch, but we need to have a plan, and we can hold people accountable to natural transition times, like at a vacation break or at the end of a grading term. So if a student is working in the standalone model, they could transition at the end of a grading time, at a vacation, at the end of a semester, so that we can pull grades, pull information, and transition a child thoughtfully into a new section, find where they need to go, build them a schedule. I just don't want people to think that it's seamlessly easy to bump back and forth between any model. The question around homeschooling, we probably have 42 families that so far, I don't hold me accountable to that. I think that have opted for homeschooling, or maybe it's 42 students, smaller family number, who will opt for homeschooling. Homeschooling is something that's been at play in our nation for a very long time. You can take your child out of school, out of public education, and you submit an educational plan that you want to implement with them. You then are basically withdrawing your child from the public school system. That homeschool selection is a clean choice for some families. I know there's a whole array of things that people are considering there. There's a process by that. You ask to do that, and we give you an application, and you fill it out, and you send us your plan. By law, by homeschooling law, you can go back and forth. So similarly, you can. Some people that are homeschooling also wanted to know, and by law, it allows, for example, like we have homeschoolers who come in for band or music or to join one of our athletic teams. So those parameters to cross over for some of those things do exist. I would imagine that if we have students in that standalone remote, one of the questions was, well, how can my child stay connected to their peers if I'm in a standalone? Once we know who's where and what's going on, teachers naturally will find some overlap where a student might come in for an online a cappella group or a social group or things that are going on if we can plug them in.
Okay, so talk to me for a minute about, well, first on the switching, just to be clear. So it sounds like perhaps at the end of a quarter, and that's a grading period, that might be a time where people could switch. And really, you're talking, what, there, 10 weeks? Like, how long is a quarter usually? Are they all, is everybody quarters? Yeah. We have some trimesters.
Some trimesters. So at the natural transitions, we feel like that's the base guideline that we'll try to work from. It doesn't mean, of course, that we won't then have exceptions. I think we're a pretty personal district. And so, you have a whole range of families that are going to have questions, and if we can get open and we can get a model in place and we can get started, our natural mechanisms for answering parent questions will kick in. I know that feels like an unsatisfying answer in the sense that, yes, you will be allowed to switch. We will let you. We would ask to work with you to make that as smooth for your child as possible. I don't think that I would ever advise, and I would certainly try to draw a line in the sand with people, that they should be bumping back and forth. Does that seem harsh?
Absolutely.
I hope not.
No, I mean, based on what you just said about continuity of learning, it seems to make sense. What about, people wondered about, I think maybe early on, people felt like hybrid would mean some days you're home, some days you're in school, and when you're home, you're zooming into the classroom with a camera. Yeah. So we have people saying, why can't the district put cameras in each classroom and have kids in the standalone plan and the hybrid model on at-home days watching the teacher in the classroom remotely?
Right. That was an original model from years ago where, I actually taught in some of that virtual stuff when people were exploring it for like some college coursework and stuff, and some online learning that was going on. This is a partnership we share with our faculty, and our faculty does not select that as an option for this implementation that they feel comfortable they can function well within. We really feel that in looking at a hybrid model, there's a couple reasons why I'm not recommending that. One, I support that teachers feel like it would distract from their need to make the classroom time and face time with the students who are there gold, as we call it. You've got those students for the day, and you need to focus on them with flexibility to change your plan, to move into small group one-to-one instruction. I think people have this picture of like, oh, well, the teacher will stand and lecture and my kid could just watch that. But our classrooms don't run that way. There's Socratic seminar discussions. There's small group instruction up close with kids. So the need for the faculty to focus on those 8 to 12 students who are with them is where they want to put that energy. And the planning for the far learning, we see it as close and far, isn't going to be completely unsupported. And we can talk about that a little further if you want. But the The camera at the back of the classroom is not a model that the faculty desires as the implementation plan, and there's all sorts of other complications for tech. We're supporting 4,000 students and almost 800 faculty for technology needs, and then you're going to layer hundreds of cameras across district and have to help people manage that. We just don't feel that we have the bandwidth to do that, and that the payoff for it isn't there. That said, I just want to say it's individual teacher choice, and for some, they've said, like, they've asked, hey, well, Amber, I could certainly, like, tape my lesson when I'm lecturing and load it to my Google Classroom for kids to review. We're like, you can do what you want. You're that teacher. You provide your best instructional methodology. While I don't think there'll be a lot of live video, we certainly saw teachers doing a lot of video posted lessons. So I think that full array will continue to be a part of this model.
Mm-hmm. So I like giving the teachers kind of that flexibility and creativity for how they want to deliver that.
They've really designed some great stuff. That's what they're working on now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have you back up a little bit. We talked about the hybrid plan a little bit.
Yep.
Just if you could describe for people that standalone plan, and I know that that looks a little bit different pre-K through.
Yeah, I mean,
8,
I think I
7.
certainly want to acknowledge that for a lot of people, they feel like that's the poor neighbor right now, where we're not addressing it with the depth that people want to make a decision. I would just comment that to parents, I think you have to decide whether you feel comfortable sending your child back to school in the model that we're providing. And if you're not, you have to default to that, and it will be what we can provide. And I don't mean that to be like dismissive. We have to move as quickly as we can to fold all of these plans in place. The standalone remote right now is developing as quickly as we can develop it, along with all the other ones. So right now, that standalone remote would be taught by, so we initially thought all posted, not us, like that's where we started because we hadn't had time to even look at it. And that's where most districts were. They were purchasing stuff to just tell families, plug in and have fun. We weren't there, but we just weren't sure where we were. Right now, where we are in the evolution of this model, and we have articulated this a couple different times, and we will put out a set of kind of like updates to this plan leading to the August 10th submission, where it'll feel more final. We anticipate that Westborough teachers who are unable to return to teach on site across a range of criteria that is run through HR would be stationed into running that standalone model. So let's say we have 25 second graders across the district of the 3 schools who aren't going to send their children back. I will either assign a second grade teacher, or if I have a teacher through HR's criteria of a whole range of needs and wants and like criteria, would assign me a second grade teacher. And that would be their position for the year, and they would be charged with that instruction. We will provide a Westborough teacher for the instruction of all of those groups. Let's say I only have 10 kindergartners and several first graders. I might have them in a blended class with one teacher. We will wait until we see, that's why we're asking families to make a decision where we are. We will assign matching staff once we know how many teachers can't come back to the classroom, how many kids can't come back to the classroom, and then we'll build that into class lists just like we do every year. At the high school, it looks a little different because there's such a complexity and a range of student scheduling. That's why the default there will probably be a blended schedule. If we have a math teacher at the high school who can't return to on-site instruction, they'll pick up their full course load of math and would have Westborough students at the high school who wouldn't be returning. But then they might have a complement of classes for their lab classes in science through VHS if I don't have a faculty member. So I think they're ending up with kind of a small internal hybrid of some VHS and some Westborough teacher.
But was there some consideration to going hybrid with the younger grades and fully remote with the high school? Like, was there ever a time where you thought you might bring some of the district back in and not other grades?
I mean, we've looked at everything. I
Yeah.
feel like
Sure.
it's almost like I have to remember. I'm like, I wish Daniel could be here. I'd be like, when did we listen to
Right.
that and discard
Right.
that thinking? We've tried along the way to look at all the pieces based upon equity for families, and then also needs for families. We have some older kids who have to provide daycare for younger kids. We have complexities around students who need to work. We have complexities around the staffing we're trying to figure out. We have equity-based issues for Unit A members for whether they come in or they don't come in, and what risk relatively everybody is put under as we come together to do the job we're wanting to accomplish with students. So when we looked at it, we decided to move forward as a whole district. I don't inherently want to represent my overall recommendation to move forward with the hybrid as only because young kids can't learn at home without help. I think if you look at the reality of what look, education doesn't exist today because it just should. It's because it has to. I would say a full 2/3 of Westborough students can't make effective progress without strong instruction from a teacher that's present and capable. That's why our kids do well. 1/3 of our kids could do well no matter where you put them at any given time. We can't design the model for the 1/3 of the kids that could thrive no matter what. We need to make sure they thrive, but they're probably the most flexible. But across the array of the high school, there's a full cohort of students that need us just as much as young learners.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the hybrid model for a minute. There were lots of cohort questions.
Yeah, okay.
So a little bit of how you'll deal with the numbers. So like, are kids guaranteed to be in hybrid even if the number is low? And, well, I'll ask you that to start with, then I'll keep going.
Yes, if you say you're returning to school, you'll be placed into the hybrid rotation and you would be in a balanced cohort.
Okay. And everybody wants to know how the cohorts will be created.
I love that.
I'm just going to add on, one of the parents asked, will an effort be made to preserve ethnic, geographic, and socioeconomic diversity within each cohort, for example, by grouping students randomly rather than by neighborhood?
So we have pretty diverse student body and pretty diverse socioeconomic array across each of the schools if we do a random draw. So we start from the premise of a random grouping, thinking that we'll get a natural mix, and then we would have to make some swaps for service delivery of students who might need to be together. So right now we're in this very intense internal process that could take hours to describe, and I won't. But every time a parent tells us what they're doing, we drop it into the cohort stream that we're trying to develop. So if I get, 10 more responses after this meeting, I've got, people working on this where what they're going to do is they're going to pull those names and they're going to drop them into the metric they're using for odd and even delineations and sorting kids. And they'll start to look at how does that impact scheduling, class size across the district. And then they'll come back and they'll kind of move the pieces around to get balance. So it's to balance also busing for transportation. So some of it has to be driven by neighborhood. But when we bring classes together, how we mix them at school is, inherently kind of flexible by class.
Right. So a couple things. People are curious about when they might know what cohort. But also, can they request to switch? Can I request to switch cohorts due to work schedules or childcare issues? So what kind of work would the school do with people on that?
I'm just so poignantly aware of all of this. Like, as I said, the number of moving pieces in this decision making and everybody needing to know yesterday, while we don't want teachers to feel forced before they have decision making time. Like, there's just these inherently conflicting needs to serve all of our constituencies, our faculty and our families and our students equally. I know people are desperate to find out what their cycle is, both for work and for childcare, and also same for our faculty. So I'm hopeful. That's why the deadline is the 3rd, and I know that's making people frantic. So I'm getting half the emails from people to say, how can you ask me to make this choice? I'm not submitting until I have time. And then I have the other people like, why is this taking so long? Give me my cohort. So I feel like torn down the middle every morning by just the different lists of conflicting needs. And I'm not whining about it. I'm just being truthful. So, on any given day, one person's happy and one person's unhappy.
Right.
I'm hopeful that by the end of the week, after today, we would like people to kind of, try to take a step forward and figure out what they want to do. We will be calling people to ask, and by the end of the week, I'm hopeful to have a tight list, and we would then be able to move towards releasing cohorts next week. I hope.
And kind of along the lines of what you were just saying, just because I've been looking through all the questions, it was very interesting to me when I would get a question saying, why are we being asked to make this decision a month and a half ahead of time? And then the next few questions you would see, can't you just give me an answer about what the plan is so that I can
And they're
plan
both
with
totally
work?
legitimate.
And they're both
Please
legitimate.
know that when we feel torn down the middle, we love both halves. Like, I get that.
There were
like,
several different examples of
I get
that,
emails
but
like that
it's
every day,
hard.
too. And I think that it's just really important to acknowledge to people why I wanted to have a forum. It's not to beg forgiveness or to seem, helpless. It's just to be truthful that we're working as quickly as we can. Any single one of these decisions, just getting bus lists ready to go, usually for us has a lot of mechanics. And so we want to move as quickly as we can to get you the answers you need.
That's great. Okay. Will the remote learning, so you talked before about kind of getting in front of kids and all that.
Yeah.
And with the hybrid plan, but with remote learning, is it going to cover more curriculum because they're going to have multiple days of curriculum with either a teacher or a teaching plan? Like, I think there was some concern from people about whether or not students in the remote learning can participate in the lessons every day, while in the hybrid model, a student can only participate half the time in the class.
So there's a lot of reality checks there that I want to really help people so that we don't get into a mythology around what that hybrid model looks like or what the remote looks like. The state has been clear, and we looked at those guidelines again today in our working groups with teachers, and we said it in our plan, this school year is a full year of curriculum. So it is expected that a full school day is being put in regardless of where you are. Regardless of where you are. And that's across the Commonwealth. So the directive is that we will teach our curriculum at the rate, speed, and breadth that we can cover. We won't cover all of it, but we need to cover a great deal more of it. We will grade to a Westborough standard regardless of where students are. If they have a piece of assignment they were supposed to get done in a hybrid, it's going to have to meet the standard. If it's in a fully remote, it has to meet those standards. We are having to move back into a more full year experience. That's a lot for students, families, and teachers to wrap their head around. So it'll be a whole new experience. It's not what we did in the spring. I just have to say that live. It's not a day off when you're away. You will get curriculum and new learning that will need to be happening. One of the things that we were very thoughtful about in the design of Westborough's hybrid model was that the reason we went with ABAB, which I think some people asked about, is because if you're with your teacher Navy Day and you're home the next day, you have the most recent current instructional push in front of you as a 5-year-old or as a 15-year-old, so that what you're working on at home is real work that needs to be accomplished. Grappling with it on your own in a full day, and then coming back the next day where that teacher's there to cycle back with you. So our design was purposeful in thinking about how learning takes place and how planning takes place. So I think teachers can get the most from that at-home day, the far learning, by having had the student on either side of the day.
So people had questions about that in regard to, if their student is home on their at-home day. It's going to be hard not to call it an off day, but I understand it's not an off day.
Word. Yeah, it's not.
We can't, but yes. But so their at-home day, are there going to be educational supports for them? Like, what do you anticipate?
Sure.
if they're having trouble getting started, or their ideas about what we do with those students who might need extra help on those days?
That's a great question. So I think that's exactly the level of planning where our faculty is right now. Kind of like, what is the rhythm of those on-off days for service delivery for students with special education needs, for ELL students, for all students? I think all Westborough families experienced in the spring the capacity and strength that our faculty has to come in and do a one-to-one lesson, a small group lesson, live synchronous instruction where you're working to get support if you're at a distance. Students working with students, so if you're in a Cardinal group, you might be coming off a lab the day before and you might be working in your lab group away that day with your lab group, continuing to write up the lab and work remotely with your team, following up on that learning as an example. If you are an ELL student or a SPED student or a student in general, you might have another adult who comes into a short burst of instruction to support you and check in on the work you're doing. Let's say you have a teacher who instructed research and core facts they want pulled from a text. Student is going to be working on that the next day at home. A para or somebody else might follow up and set up a one-to-one meeting to come in and support that learner through that work and give them the type of information they need for that productive support. I think parents experienced that with us through the spring very effectively. So I don't think that we're trying to give parents or students a sense that it's an unsupported day. It will be supported by good planning and good instruction from the day before. So I hope that gives some sense.
It's a good answer. And I'm going to finish up kind of the overview of the plans, although we have a lot of details. But just talking again about the various plans, and someone asked, and I don't know if this is true, but they are stating to you, you acknowledge that minority children, families with low SES, and children with academic difficulties do not do as well with remote learning. How will you address these students' needs if they are utilizing a remote learning option?
No, that's statistical data that came out of the spring and was stated by DESE in one of their calls and the rationale for why we needed to return to in-person learning. We quoted that in our report, so I did say it, and it wasn't me. It's a re-quoting of the data and statistical analysis that came out of what we've experienced as a nation during a pandemic. So it's fresh data right off the experience of students who dropped off grid, students who couldn't access learning, students who did not move forward during that time. And so I want to give a shout out to Westborough that while we had students who struggled and we've tracked them and we know who we need to make contact with in this FaceTime right away when we get them in front of us because they struggled at a distance, we didn't just leave them there. And I think our staff came through at a very high level to run really effective one-to-one. We had people that went and stood out in people's yards and asked them to come to the door and talk to them and check in and say, how can we get you into your learning? How can we support you? We met their needs at a very high level, tracked participation and attendance and performance, and responded by reaching out and setting up supports. We will continue that regardless of what model we're in. We acknowledge it in the report because it just has to be recognized as a challenge that all educators are facing, and we need to step up and have some extra planning in place.
Of course. And are we at a place right now in Westborough where we have 100% of the students that can get to us online? Are we in that situation?
We're at about 99.9%. I mean, I have to give an incredible acknowledgement to the technology team of Westborough. John Green is really talented and dynamic and like the man behind the screen, kind of you never see him, and then his work filters out and his team gets things done. We had hotspots, we delivered them, we helped activate them. We got to every family that said they needed support and got them a technological device. We gave people multiple devices that had multiple kids and families and felt they were sharing a device too much. I would say we were at a very granular level, and I'm confident that coming into the fall, every Westborough child does have the device and the connectivity they need to function in the hybrid or the remote model.
Okay, that's great to hear. The kids I know at the upper levels, they have one-to-one devices, bring your own devices. There's a lot of things in place. But for the younger grades, are there devices available for them? How does that work? Someone asked that question.
Right. So through the spring, we were checking them out to families that needed them. They were just emailing us and being like, I've got 4 kids, or I've got 2 and we're fighting over the device, or I need it for work and my kids usually work. Like a lot of the younger kids, they would say, my student works on my computer so I can monitor them, but I need it for work. So in those cases, we checked out devices to them and we had some available. Currently, John Green is working with principals to pull back, cull, and organize the iPads in the hope that we would provide one-to-one devices for K-3 students at a school level. So we're close to finalizing that, and I think it'll be good news to families.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to move on to some of the health and safety protocols, because that was definitely raised by a lot of parents, and I know concern of our teachers and staff, faculty that's in the building for sure. So a few questions there. Here we go. Will there be any protocols for testing, either required before return to school or regularly or randomly during the school year? Just as our state has testing requirements now for visitors entering the state, we need a testing protocol for schools, their students, and faculty. As an example, every student and teacher, faculty could be tested within 14 days of the start of school or something.
So there's a lot of pieces there. And so before we dive into health and safety, I'll do a disclaimer that I feel like nothing will satisfy people's anxiety, and I understand that. And before we move into this discussion, I think I just want to acknowledge that I am not providing the information that we're going to talk through to be feeling that I think you'll be reassured. I understand that. I think we all have to mitigate risk, and we have to manage anxiety, and we have to make choices. So I'm going to explain what we're doing and try to do my best, but I just want to acknowledge, I'm sure that, if you're somebody that's anxious and doesn't feel like there's enough choices, my answers are just going to lead to more questions for you. And that should help you decide, what you need to do for your family, I hope. So the testing protocols. So DESE provided information, as did Department of Public Health and CDC, Health and Safety Committee. We looked at all of those pieces, and we were charged with developing protocols where necessary should students return in hybrid or fully remote or fully all in. So we had to come up with a whole variety of health protocols following guidelines we were given. So when we talk about testing, we're following the current recommendations and design of the testing protocols that the state require based upon identification of exposures. So, for example, you see that the state is in intensive upping the protocol for filling out a form if you travel out of state. So we're just developing a protocol right now for teachers and families to be transparent. If you travel, when you come back, you will need to follow the following: fill out the state form, and you will need to either shelter in place for 14 days, or you will need to get a test, and when you get a clean test, you return to school or work. I just traveled to Ohio, and I was transparent about that because I sheltered in place. I had to get my test in Ohio in the window of term following the state guidelines and submit that to the Board of Health, received my clearance in time to go participate in graduation. If they hadn't, I wouldn't have been at graduation and had already sent a note to Brian saying I couldn't come. Now, we could all come up with a list of, rationale for how we could handle that differently, but we're going to follow the state guidelines. So we are putting together a protocol for teachers and for families to understand that we expect them to follow the state guidelines. I know that the testing protocols at the state level give you a cycle. You shelter in place, like if you're sent with symptoms. If you've got a multitude of symptoms and you're sent home by our nursing staff who apply that protocol, you cannot return until you receive a test and you get clearance to return with a clear test. That goes for a student or a faculty member. So we will implement testing protocols, but the state isn't asking schools to do blind whole testing of faculty or students to return. They're working off of symptomatic protocol, and that we're following the state guideline on that.
Okay, because that was one of the questions was, why wouldn't we do temperature checks on student and staff whenever they enter the building?
Right. I think that's okay. I think that sorry, ask me that again.
Sorry, it's just, sorry, somebody just stepped in. Why wouldn't we do temperature checks?
Oh, yeah. So
students
initially
and
the
staff?
state told us we were going to have to, and it was in the initial guidance. And then the ongoing CDC guidance and support from the physicians groups and the American Pediatric Association, all of those moved away from that because they felt that it didn't give enough good data that it should be a morning check. It just has too many false positives for a whole variety of other reasons. Kids are running off the bus or they're sweaty and they're going to come in high because they're a sweaty young kid. So the protocol applied already that we use is if, there's any indication the student or a faculty member has a temp, you take it when there's an indication of concern. I do want to indicate that the protocol as requested, is for parents to check their children at home. And if we're all invested in this working, my staff has asked the tough question about how we hold our parents accountable to not send us kids that are sick and to not send us a kid if you're sick. And we need to really ask for the moral compass of all of us as a Westborough community to do the work it takes to stay healthy. And that means the mask protocols and the stay-at-home protocols and the contacting of your Board of Health and our nurse if you've got any questions or concerns.
Okay. If there's a case of COVID in school, how will families be notified?
So there's a set protocol in the plan that's laid out if you click on all of that, and I don't want to kind of go into that level of granular detail. We've already provided it. So this in the spring where we make contact with a family or a class based upon the radius of contact. So the nurses have a protocol. Judy Noonan is a rock star of a department head, and her team. I just want to give a shout out to our nurses in Westborough. They are highly skilled, and they have been working incredibly seamlessly with the Board of Health to do contact calling since the start of this virus. So they are seamlessly interwoven with Board of Health to do calls to families and community members to do tracing protocols. So we have the team that's been working pretty tightly, and I have confidence that our radius of call meets the Board of Health standard.
Okay, so you said that some of this is already laid out for people. So there were a number of questions. What happens if a student or teacher is diagnosed? Do the rest of the kids stay home? Do they go back online early? I'm sorry, go back online only. What happens in adjacent classrooms? Would we close down the classrooms or the cohorts?
Right.
Is that laid out in that
so
document?
So there's a whole set of protocols for, in the document, they give you these like case scenarios, not like that. And it was like this student would be, and then our plan has the Westborough plan. It's like if you look at it, if a child tests in an adjacent room, that question, you isolate the positive individual, you investigate when symptoms began and when the person was in school. You have to identify close contacts over the last 2 days before the first symptoms started. You consult with the Westborough Board of Health and implement the protocol that they require. And again, our protocols are stricter. CDC guidelines said that initially a student could remain at school as long as they were wearing a mask. We request that student go to the isolation space, well cared for by us, and with a lot of empathy, and then head home. And that's the same for faculty. There's a whole then another tier that you are then sent home, send a communication to families and student and staff members in the classroom and cohort that there has been a test that's positive, no names are released. You explain that since they were within the cohort, they are considered a close contact and they must be tested. So it's laid out in the document.
Okay, so I don't even want to spend a lot of time on it as long as people know where they can find it.
And I don't want people to think I'm like, deferring the question because I don't want to deal with it. I just think it's better if you read it. And then I think the other piece is we're putting together a flow chart because I think our staff wants to revisit it. And I think we all have to. Here's the thing. Like there was a great article in the New York Times the other day which said, we want to be explicit and honest. As I said, authentic, not agreeable. Like you might not agree with what we say, but we want authentic and honest data in front of you. Here's how Westborough Public Schools is going to handle if a student tests positive. And then that protocol needs to be delineated for our staff and our faculty all around those groupings as well as our families. And then we need to implement it with fidelity. And that's what we're committed to. 100 opinions about whether or not we should change it or not, I will only defer to the Board of Health. And the Board of Health will tell us if our protocol meets the standard. And we're starting with them right now, next week, to review the protocols that the state gave us.
Okay, so communication would come either from the schools or possibly from the Board of Health. So the Board of Health has been doing these nice weekly synopses of where we stand in relation to our COVID cases in town. I'm assuming they'll continue to do that. And the schools will also be communicating with us then. I mean, you might be able to get some of that from the Board of Health, but the schools will be proactive in their communication.
Yeah, I think right now I'm anticipating a couple things around health and safety. I think it's important. So, like, there's a couple highlights of this. There's a health and safety committee that we put in place with admin and nurse leaders, and started with Suzanne Kenny, head of HR, because there's a bunch of HR criteria for overlap of HIPAA and all these guidelines. So we started there with all the state guidelines and then fleshed out the Westborough guidelines that are in the document you saw. We then put those back in front of teachers and started pulling on them to take feedback. That's where that stands. And now the Board of Health will look at them and give us other pieces as well. But in terms of the metric that we will put in front of them, that safety committee will stay in place for the year. And we will add a teacher faculty member from each building so that we'll keep that as a core team, and they'll look at data daily and weekly. So we will feed that dashboard from the nurses. So it'll then populate some pivot charts, which will give us building by building data. A student was sent to the nurse because they had a temp. They were fine, they were circled back to class, or they were sent home. And then we gather that data and we review it daily and weekly with the Board of Health through the nurse leader. So that protocol will be put into place so that what we have is transparency of data and information where the Board of Health can give us guidance. And then the next tier of using that metric, do you close a classroom? Do you close a school? Do you close a district? Do you close a town? You know, that's driven by Board of Health looking at that criteria and using their standard of benchmark. I mean, Dr. Ehrlich and that team, they're very, very strong. And that's the plan that we're utilizing right now in our mind.
Okay. So that's great, because that was kind of the one thing, I mean, the protocols and all, if people can read those in the document, but definitely we had a few different people asking several, you know, how will the public schools determine when it's time to close a building or the district?
Yeah.
And will those in the hybrid shift to a virtual program, more like what we did last spring? I know you said this year is going to look different than that, but in that case, and kind of, is there a tipping point or a magic number of cases or rate of infection? And how would you determine when they open again?
Yeah, I mean, our parents and our faculty are smart, intellectual people. The bottom line is, if you think about it, like, let's play out one scenario. Let's say you had to close a classroom, right? So then that teacher, that's why we have to be nimble, and all models have to be developed. Let's say the Board of Health says, well, let's close this classroom and push it home for 14 days. So that directive would be given, that class would shift home, and they would shift to complete remote for the 2 weeks of isolation, and then based upon cleared testing and the Board of Health criteria would rotate back in at the hybrid if that was the direction of the guidance that we got from the board. So that's why all of these plans have to have that capacity to be utilized when given that guidance. And that's where we are right now in that conceptual planning.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go to some cleaning, which will hopefully prevent us from having to deal with the topic before. If hybrid is chosen and there will be days in school and days at home, what daily cleaning measures will be put in place to mitigate the transfer from Cardinal to Navy cohorts?
Yeah.
And importantly, it's kind of a second piece, what bus cleaning measures will be put in place after and before each school drop-off or pickup?
All right, so let's do school and then push me on buses again, because I might forget. So currently there was a lot of this like language, it's kind of interesting language around deep cleaning. I think that the cleaning protocols for deep cleaning are protocols that we'll utilize in buildings every day, and that we put in place during flu season, that we put in place automatically during, like, when there's an increase in illness and you get one of those notices from your teacher like, hey, there's strep in the building. we up the ante on that protocol. So some districts have taken to calling that deep cleaning. What it is something that we do a lot of all the time and is a protocol we know how to put in place. What it looks like is our custodial team, where we pull in an extra person. One of the custodial team comes in, we pull in extra staff. Usually one of the night people shifts to day, so you have 2 on site, and they double their rotation. So they're going to clean all touch points. That's handles, bathrooms, doors, touch points for desktops, sink handles, all that type of stuff. They have a whole touch point protocol where they wipe all that stuff down. All our products are green. All of them meet the standard for safety of hospital level use and school-based use, with the benchmark of being both a disinfectant and safe. And I think there's questions about that later, and we're happy to post that. We have those product names, and we'll put them online for people, and they'll be in our reports. But touch point cleaning also means we use our floor cleaners with an increased disinfectant sanitizer on all the floor cleaning. And then during the day, the design right now is the custodians will add double sweeps through the bathrooms, cleaning them multiple times a day, and also at night increasing more classroom-based wipe downs. Now, another piece of that we invested in was the microstatic cleaners, where they're the air misters. That has a 99.5, I think, percent COVID kill within, I think it's a 3-minute window, and it has like a 5-minute dry time. So those are at use right now, and actually we started using those in the spring last year, where custodial teams use those as part of their disinfecting protocol at night. We are looking at reviewing the dry time and the health factors on those again while they're considered green. We'd like to increase some of the day use for them between like in the bathroom cycle, but we haven't confirmed that yet until the nurse and Kelly looks at it and we talk about it more. All of those are cleaning protocols which we've mapped out and amped up, where we feel confident we can keep our buildings clean.
All right, that answered a whole bunch of questions.
I know, sorry.
So that's good. But now I got to catch up.
They're
to where
buses.
you are.
You want me to hop to buses, or do you want to ask me more cleaning, and then we'll do buses at the end?
I'm going to time out for 1 second before we get to buses, but we'll get back to that. So you said, one of the questions was, can you please provide the material safety data sheets for the cleaning agents?
Definitely.
And you said you can make that available.
Yeah, Kelly G. Capello, our assistant buildings and ground, was a hospital-based manager of hospitals. Her cleaning protocols and her knowledge about green products that also disinfect, she's top shelf. And she's really working with Judy Noonan on all decisions around this.
That's great. So let's go to buses and what we're going to do about cleaning buses and being safe with buses. And when
DESC put out a giant list of protocols to busing companies about how they had to space students. So there's a triad of things that will go with busing. Windows open, cleaning between each run, wiping down all the seats, and using the microstatic sprayer through the bus once in between each run, and also spacing students, and they will wear masks. So you've got a strong kind of, and again, this is, if anybody listens to Dr. Fauci and all the guidelines, it's using multiple layers to diminish risk. And I think the protocols of masks, disinfecting, and spacing, that's the triad we're putting in place in all of our planning.
That's great. Someone would like to know if the school bus will have their windows open,
yes,
even if the weather is cold and snowy.
We're not going to try to freeze kids out. I imagine we'll crack them, and keep an increased fresh air flowing, and that's what the drivers are going to want as well.
That's great. Okay. I'm going to stick with cleaning a little bit, or not really cleaning, but kind of the safety in the school itself. And so that's a couple of questions on ventilation and HVAC.
Yep.
Here's one. Coronavirus is a respiratory virus and shown to more commonly spread in indoor spaces, especially when people are talking, yelling, singing. What specific plans are in place for implementing outdoor learning and assuring good ventilation in the classroom? So kind of related to that, do the heating, cooling systems use fresh or recirculated air? And is there a plan to leave windows open during school days for air circulation?
Great questions. Faculty, have a lot of intense questions around this.
Sure.
They are adults working in those spaces all day. So a couple things. First of all, you're layering all of the work around HVAC systems also against the mask wearing protocol, which I think, again, I know I'm saying things that people realize, but I think people can get anxious and you fixate on one piece. And I think it's important that you acknowledge that everybody's wearing a mask. So the respiratory circulation is different if we're all doing what we're supposed to do. That's one piece. But when we're looking at the HVAC systems, we hired a consultant who was working with large corporations that are in large office spaces with schools and who has serviced some of our HVAC equipment over the years. And they're currently drawing up kind of a summary memo for me to send to school committee and to put into our next report. And to share with parents. So they came in and looked at, again, a cluster of approaches that provide air quality control. So one is the masks. One is some windows open and cracked, but you don't want to, they don't recommend all windows open all the time in all buildings because you lose all the static control of your HVAC system. And so that's not their recommendation, but they recognize that people might rotate windows open on some cycle, and that's acceptable within the model of keeping a balance. You want your fresh air circulating through your system. We circulate right now. The recommendation from this consultant was to bring our air circulation up to 55% fresh air intake on a regular cycle through our HVAC systems in all buildings. We then brought him in, and they've done a building-based room by room HVAC look to make sure they kind of put a cap over the HVAC and they run it and they take the gauge on, is it really blowing 55, the right cycle, and is it bringing in the right amount of fresh air? You don't want to burn out your system. So there's two things. If you have all windows open and then you put in these super thick filters, you can burn out your fans, and we don't want a non-circulating system. He's given us really good consult advice on that. We currently, if you look at the recommendations from basically air specialists, they look to this level 13 filter. That's on all of our rooftop units have these MERV 10 to 13 filters is the target they're looking for. And we have MERV 13 filters on all of our rooftop units pulling in. And then you have your HVAC unit, the actual blowing unit in your classroom also has a filter in it. So not all classrooms can take a MERV 13 because they're so thick they don't push any fresh air through. So he's recommending in some of those rooms we hit it with a 10 and we rotate them more fully. So I feel like we have a comprehensive readiness plan. He also recommends humidity balances because he really is a specialist, and he looked at, for example, the balance of how the basically the microscopic COVID travels, and it tends to attach and ride on things, and you want to filter out what it's riding on. Water particles, humidity-based particles as well. So it's kind of, again, it's a specialty area, so we brought in someone to look at it with us. He feels confident that our rotation and planning model meets a very high standard.
Okay. You keep mentioning masks. Students pre-K through 12 will be required to wear them?
Yep.
Will there be mask breaks?
So first of all, the most major mask break that a kid gets is you're only in 2 days a week. So again, I think it's important that we all kind of create a framework of thinking about this. If we open in that hybrid model, you have 2 days a week to 2.5 days if we keep that Friday half day where your child is going to be wearing a mask. Yes, we will leverage mask breaks. We will set up a protocol for that. Faculty will be wearing masks 4 to 5 days a week. Therefore, it's important for us that the adults get mask breaks. But what's more important to our adults is that their kids wear masks. So faculty is adamant that to return to work, the protocol for pre-K to 12 for students to wear masks has to be in place.
Are there any requirements for the masks? So somebody wanted to know, sent me a question just now about whether or not bandanas are okay. Is there going to be any requirements in that regard?
So I think we're going to want to work with every family to start with their working mask that they arrive in. And then if a family or an individual student needs support from us to upgrade a mask or to get something that fits better, I think that's just like we do all our work. And I think that it's an individual, family-based decision. There's different discussions on bandanas. I'll defer to, I see faculty wearing them as well. I think that we'll probably start at a range of masks and then make adjustments based upon guidelines from our nursing. We will be purchasing some masks. Sorry, I just want to say our protocols are that the buses will have extra masks available, but the expectation is that when your child steps on the bus, they're wearing a home mask that you've provided for them. We will have backup masks, both in classrooms, at the office level, available. That happens to me all the time. I know, based upon having them all available. We've ordered thousands, so they will be available, but the expectation is that families are providing their child's
masks. For students, not that any of our students ever don't follow directions, but I'll talk about the younger grades in a minute, but if we're talking about middle school or high school students, there'll just be typical penalties in place for students who are breaking that rule.
You're so funny. Let's not start at penalty. Let's start at good coaching. You know what? We have such fabulous students. I mean, they're also kids. Like, I totally get both sides of that. But I have to say, in my experience of 6 years in Westborough, a high compliment to the families who live and educate their children here with us. We have fabulous kids, and that's why we all miss them and we want to get back to educating them. I think that we're confident that coaching kids in the right direction will work and be effective. Some students who might struggle because of complex learning needs and special learning needs will require social stories and coaching in order to master masks. We'll help them. I have a lot of confidence. I see a lot of 3 to 5 year olds wearing masks all the time around town, so I think we're ahead of the curve on it.
Can you provide more details? I'm going to skip now to some of the just cafeterias and hallways and all, but provide more details on meal arrangement. Is it still an option to bring food from home, or can they buy food? Can they choose to have lunch in the cafeteria, classroom, or outdoors? And will there be anyone watching them if they choose to be outdoors?
We always watch our children. Of course, we're not going to leave any of our children kind of unmanaged, across the spectrum of age. We take all those responsibilities. So any place that a student would be having a lunch, a mask break, or transition is obviously supported by adult supervision. We would be utilizing outdoor space for eating, as a potential through good weather of the fall. We're going to be spreading out lunches. We're currently mapping it. It's kind of a by building decision based upon capacity to spread out. We also have to spread out staff. So, I think you also have half the number of kids. So let's just picture that, okay? Right away, you cut it in half. You've got half the students. You can leverage classroom space, some cafeteria space, some other alternative areas, and outside. You're spreading those students out to follow the CDC guidelines that they need to be a full 6 feet apart to remove masks and eat lunch. And then the protocol is, you're done with your lunch, you put on your mask, you walk across, you dump your lunch, and you go outside to play with your mask on, So I think that those are all routines that we feel confident down at. I've listened to the planning level of teachers. We have a fine staff, and they're laying it out. The lunch delivery will be ironed out next week. It's kind of like a later tier piece until we see our cohort numbers and look at spaces. But, of course, we will be serving lunch. We are negotiating with them kind of the range of lunches because we imagine in some cases those will be delivered to classrooms. So if a student buys a lunch that day, it would be put on the tray for that class and delivered down if they're eating in their classroom or in an outside space or wherever they are. Lunch has to find them. And the protocol for how we pack that would probably be more like a bagged grab and go. But we haven't decided if that's hot or cold. But we will be providing lunch service to students.
I have another question from someone saying, how many sinks with hot water have been added to the high school so students can wash their hands before lunch? If the answer is none, what's the current ratio of students to sinks at the high school? It's a pretty specific
That's a great question. I was just talking with Kelly G. Capello, again, assistant buildings and grounds person who's fabulous, about we have a couple of the universal sinks that you can move around. We've used them outside for events. She's looking to do an additional purchase there so we can space those out and explore their effectiveness in providing different stations for students either at Gibbons or at the high school, but mostly high school spacing, to access washing hands. So they would have the option to rotate into the bathrooms. Those sinks would be distanced as they already are, with some taped off and others available, as well as then some additional stations, and then the combination of hand sanitizers, which are stationed throughout the building in multiple places, all meeting the criteria of guidelines placed in working collaboration with the fire marshal about what can be where in hallways. So there's just so many layers. I mean, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole on that, but there's just lots of guidelines. So yes, I'm looking to explore adding some sinks, and where we would place those would be strategic, and a student can select to hand sanitize or to wash hands. And some students will select to do both.
Yeah. How about students traveling through the hallways, and how will the staircases work?
So that's an interesting conversation. It's actually part of the discussion that they were looking at the safety committee around some of that, but it's really, again, very building based, and it'll be dependent upon, some places are marking up and down staircases. Some people are talking about kind of delaying the rotation of dismissing their kids from classes. Like at Gibbons, you've got kids that can kind of travel in their pod. There's 45 students who kind of pod together in a team, but you can kind of rotate your dismissal to space them. They're moving in a tighter circle. You've got kind of a general 45 kids that are circulating together in certain rooms. You can just collaborate on kind of staggering their rotational switch. At the high school, you're looking at, again, you have half the number of kids. You're spacing them out, and then you're defining some circulation based upon marking stairwells, areas where you don't want kids to congregate. Those things will feel different.
Right. I just had somebody write in saying, would the district consider installing touchless faucets?
I don't even know.
Yep.
I think that's
that
would take more time. That would take more time than the immediate responsive plan. Yep. We do have some, but most of them, I know when I'm there, I pump the top with my elbow and wash my hands. I use all the student bathrooms. Just want to do a shout out to our custodial team. I use all the student bathrooms throughout the district, and our faucets work. And our kids are really good at this. They elbow push the top and wash their hands, and that will need to serve us for now.
Yep. Just maybe an idea going forward, depending on how this all plays out. Will the students have recess?
Yes.
Grades K through 6?
All the kids that have always had recess will have recess. Yeah.
I don't want to get the middle school.
Yeah, the middle school and the high school. Sorry.
Not you. All right, I'm going to move on, if I can, to some special ed questions. And I know that information came out last night about, or yesterday, about special education plans. So feel free on some of these to point to that document if you feel like that would answer those.
Right.
But certainly there's lots of questions about what special education services are going to look like, specifically at the K through 6 level. So you want to just talk a little bit about what arrangements have been made for those students?
Right. So I emailed a parent today where I said, the most important work I can do for your child, every child who's a SPED child is also a typical child. And a part of their learning needs are special, and a part of their learning needs are typical. We're always looking towards the fact that in developing what we do with all typically developing students, we're also meeting the needs of our special education students for the vast proportion of who they are that's typical. And for the portion of their supported needs that are special education, we then apply the guiding features of their IEP to provide the supports that they need. So right now, I think the most important thing that we need to do is define what is typical instruction on a daily basis going to look like in Westborough and make that happen. And that is still active, fluid, based upon all the things we've just talked about. So I'm not ignoring special ed parents when I haven't answered the next tier of their needs. And I don't expect that that will satisfy them, but we're in a truth and reality phase, right? Right now I'm attending to the portion of your child that is typical and needs to have whatever is going to happen across the district for all students figured out first, and the service delivery that then lifts your child's needs and gives them access to the full school experience has to be layered on top of whatever the heck the full school experience is going to be. So until that's defined, it's a precipitous conversation that we can't really match to their needs yet. So it feels like, well, we're ignoring you because I feel a sense of urgency. And I would say everyone feels urgency. And right now what the model is going to look like needs to be defined first. And then we'll layer in that second tier of, we've been clear that we will meet people's IEPs. Aspects of that instruction will look different in meeting that IEP, because that's what aspects of all typical instruction are looking like in the public school experience. So the charge of your IEP is to give you access to public education at its full breadth. And the full breadth is going to be impacted for everybody. So it's going to be impacted for special ed kids as well. So there will be things that don't get taught for every child in Westborough, and there'll be things that are accomplished. And we're all going to cope with what this pandemic is placing on us, and our faculty will do the absolute best they can. After we define the model, liaisons will start reaching out to special ed parents to contact them around what kinds of IEP implementations will we put in place. So certainly through the spring, we served all of our students, inclusive of IEP students, working virtually. And so some of those would remain in place on those away days of the hybrid model. Service delivery provided as it's being provided to all students on that day. It might be a small group session with a SPED teacher, or it might be a para checking in, or it might be a small group meeting. All those things will be practices that we'll put in place to meet IEP expectations. And I think the fact document that went out, targeted a good number of questions, but I think it's really helpful for people to read that. And then, I know that they'll have follow-up questions. But again, until you see the core model come out, those questions follow.
Okay, so that's the whole thing with an IEP, is it's very individualized depending on each of those students' needs.
Right.
This parent is saying, that they're concerned about their son losing years of progress day by day with the current learning platform. Will
Right.
some small percentage of students on IEPs be able to receive 4 or 5 day a week in-person instruction?
Oh, that's a great question. That applies to guidance from DESE and has to be applied across the district. And this, we provided, if you take the summer school as an example, we maintained extended year services remotely this year, and had some students, based upon the complexity of their IEP and their needs or their implementation of the remote learning, that we brought in for face-to-face, and we did provide in-person service delivery to those that required it. So following the guidelines of the IEP and working with liaisons and staying in relationship with those families. So the answer is yes, there will be students who, based upon the complexity of their needs, I think there's like 135 students right now. It might go up, it might go down. Some parents might not want that full access, others will. We'll step it forward one guideline at a time, utilizing the disabilities that we're facing in the complexities of supporting your child. That is an individual conversation. It isn't it's not productive to come together into large group sessions on some of that, because IEPs are an individual process, and your liaison is really the best person to work with.
All right, great. The Westborough CPAC committee sent in a letter with questions regarding SPED services and supports for the upcoming year. They are wondering when they can expect some answers to that letter.
I mean, that is the fact, question, response, and letter is that response. Okay. I think we basically pulled those questions and started answering them, okay. And that's what the fact question is. So I applaud CPAC organizing the questions for us, and the fact sheet went out through district, because, again, all children and all parents and all of us as a community, it's not just SPED parents that should get that information. That I push that out Westborough all. I feel strongly that any parent wants to know what we're doing to meet the needs of their friends and neighbors and colleagues if their child has some complex learning challenges. And so I push those out as Westborough all and take responsibility to make sure that all of our families can hear, because we've had other parents ask, like, well, how are you supporting SPED kids? Well, so we pushed it out Westborough all for that reason. I think that's a nice change. Like, we keep learning things. Like, why didn't I do that all the time? You know, like I called Sherry Stevens, Director of Student Services. I'm like, Sherry, how come we don't just push that out Westborough all? Because it should go to all. It's not, you know, it's not a subculture. Like we all parents care what we're doing with all learners. So I think that's a great change, and CPAC's a wonderful partner around, you know, leveraging those discussions. I welcome it, and I think we're just continuing to get better at our work together.
All right, great. A couple more in this regard. Would a high school faculty teacher teach from home for the Learning Center? Do you envision that happening?
Would a learning center teach from home? You mean go to a parent's home or teach from home?
I don't know what.
Well, let's pretend both are happening in the question. We are not. We have home-based services for very, very, you know, tight, strict protocols, and that's always existed based upon some delineation of medical needs or certain things. But service delivery for our SPED staff will happen on site at the building because we can control the cleaning protocols. They don't know how you clean, and they don't know who you've had in your home. And that's just an authentic protection for our faculty. So your student needs to come to us in a clean space where the adult that is employed to work with your child feels safe. Okay. So that's that piece. Will we have SPED teachers who will have to pick up aspects of the standalone remote to deliver service? I anticipate, based upon the number of people that select that we would obviously, meeting their IEPs, have to assign some staff to work on that.
And then kind of my last question in this area is, how are students on 504 plans going to be accommodated?
By the guidance of their plan, their liaison that they have will make sure that the implementation of their 504 is met as best we can in whatever model we are in. You know, if you, again, all of these are aspects of why our recommendation is a hybrid model, okay? Because if you've got a kid that has ADHD and has attentional difficulties, some of them are thriving in that at-home model, but others, they just can't maintain the attention without constant maintenance from a parent. And that model is exhausting and not sustainable. So again, all of these led to that base recommendation. But we will meet the guideline of the 504 to the best of our ability, regardless of if we're close or far during that hybrid day or 100% remote.
Right. So this just brings up that I want to make sure people are clear that if I don't get to their question, the schools has all the questions and all the chats that are coming through on YouTube. So where people are making suggestions or have ideas, that those are all going to be taken into account by your staff. So for instance, this person regarding the 504 said, I think 504 students, it would be helpful if there was a point person for office hours or something, someone they could connect with in the morning with questions so that it would be more effectively completing their independent work on their days at home. So people have suggestions. And my point
that's a great suggestion. I mean, I think we did some assigning of staff in the spring to do that. And I certainly think, you know, I think our teaching faculty have really good instructional instincts, and each time they see a gap, they're like, how can we fill it? You know, so, but until we have a model and an agreement and a plan, we can't kind of come in and enhance it. But those are great suggestions for enhancements, and I think we'll use many of them.
Sure. And there really are. There are a lot of good suggestions.
Good suggestions,
that
everyone.
Your staff might already be thinking about, but might not be. And so I'm appreciative that people are sending those and the chat. And I just want to make sure they're aware that some of those where it's more of a suggestion, I'm going to be, well, you have access to.
Do we have to speed answer questions now? I'll shorten my answers. Okay, go.
But no, we're going to get into some of the kind of all grades.
Okay.
So do we have any idea yet how many teachers are returning or what teacher-student ratios will look like?
That's kind of two questions, because we will have, you know, the student-teacher ratio will be defined at half. When you really look, they're going to be great because, you know, you'll be looking at that difference in number. So regarding where we are, we asked the same question of faculty that we asked of parents, which is, what are your plans? We roughly have about 750 all in faculty. That's noon aides, that's custodians, that's admin, that's everybody. We asked them all the same questions. We've heard from about 520, of the 520, there's about 25% of them that wanted more information, and then there's subsets of them that need HR time. Just like I think people will, like I was just saying, the data tracks similarly on parents. The vast majority of parents are indicating that they'll send their child back in the hybrid model, and then there's about 10 to 12% right now tracking that will make another choice. So, I think we're on track to match them up, hopefully.
All right, grades pre-K to 6 for hybrid. Just a little bit about what those classes will look like for hybrid. Will kids be sharing desks or assigned to particular desks?
So that's one of the things those 10 days will utilize. We've done some sample spacing, like the principals went in and pushed classrooms around and did photos that they sent to the planning group, the committee we were saying, that we're working with. We're like, here's some sample classroom layouts. So looking at how the spacing worked, and we had to do this pressure testing for the state where we had to actually space it out because they wanted to see how we could do the 3-foot separation. So then once we weren't bringing all students back, we bring that cohort into half, and then we're looking at how people want to move their furniture around to create kind of the natural separation. We'll be beyond the 3 feet and at 6 feet in some cases, but we'll be between like 4 to 6 feet in the typical spacing of our classes at the hybrid level.
And will there be any barriers between tables at all? Will we be using that?
We're not bringing in large plexiglass barriers because the fire department has been clear that they don't meet code for protection because plexiglass isn't rated, fire rated, so we won't be using those.
I know you've been doing some of these in-person summer programs for that age group, pre-K through 6.
Yeah.
Can you just share what you've learned regarding masks and social distancing and instruction and play? Because we've had children wondering if young children can handle that when they're at school.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if I had gotten a text. So we have 2 groups that have we have a couple things that have given us samplings. We have the summer programming being done, as you said, for SPED, service delivery. And I think we've learned that PPE gear is hot for our faculty, because they have a combination of masks and shields. They have a clear mask. They have then a shield. They have their regular mask of choice. It's their personal mask. They have, in some cases, like a vest thing, like whatever. Sorry, I should get the terminology correct. Like a jacket that they can wear. So we've learned that the PPE takes time to get used to. We've learned that kids are joyful to see their adult teachers, and that the sense of interaction, while different and still a little weird in the beginning, normalizes over time. And that our teachers that have been working in that model feel that they've been able to get assessment work done and to make up some ground. So I think there's pros and cons to it. It will look different, and we've learned that it feels different, but that it also normalizes. We conducted, as an example, our Westborough leadership retreat of our own retreat leadership team socially distanced. And we wore PPE gear, and we spaced, and we used the 6-foot protocol. We went outside for mask breaks. We learned that it was hard to hear each other when we have some masks on. So all of that's part of implementation of what we've learned.
Sure. So kind of along those lines, will the district require staff and teachers to wear the clear masks, smile masks?
They will be given choice. I just ordered a couple different kinds of smile masks because one of the ones we ordered for summer were almost more like mini shields, and they stood away from the face a little bit, and then you could put them on with a shield. But then we wanted to make sure that we could close them up more. So we have some of those, which for some teachers are very comfortable and they would like to wear that one. And then we'll buy a couple others that will have some clear options.
Okay, so I have another question. Will you spend class time educating students on proper mask wearing and hygienic protocols while in school?
Totally. I mean, I think the idea circulating right now is creating some learning videos, taking the first 2 weeks with students to talk about how we have to learn in this new learning. Like, what does your away day look like, and what are the expectations for you, and how are you living with me when you're here, and what are the new protocols? We need to normalize that. We need to find joy in it, and we need to make it seem like a good idea. That's the work that teachers do that's magical. Like, they're going to find a way to create joy in this because they're skilled. And they're going to find ways to create community while kids are in masks. All of that has to be taught. That will be our core focus. Academics will be secondary. Let me just say that again. Academics will be secondary for every Westborough child until we get them back in front of us. We see their face. They see ours. We get safety routines in place. We kind of get the mechanics ironed out, and then we'll introduce academics.
Great. So I think another comment that I saw flash across my screen here, got a lot of moving pieces, even
You're
right
doing
here.
great, Karen.
Even
I just
right
want to
here.
say, Karen
Diane
Henderson,
Sawyer.
shout out to
I
you,
don't know.
Westborough
I don't
TV.
know. But another comment one of the parents was making is communicating to parents about that, making sure that parents are aware of what the requirements are,
Yeah.
and including kind of the protocol for if your child's sick. So not just if they're sick with COVID, but if they're sick, kind of the guidelines for when you send your child to school versus when you don't, and making sure that that's clear to people.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty clear. If your child's sick, they're not supposed to come
Yeah,
to school.
I know.
It's not
And
the
you
year
might-
to give
you
your
might-
kid Tylenol and give them out to us. I mean,
Right.
so, look, I mean, I've raised kids, where I looked at that temp and was praying it would go down so I could get to work. But that's not the year for this, and I think that everyone's accepting the added responsibilities. We will be pushing home some little videos and things, so we'll definitely be teaching those protocols to parents.
Can you, again, we're sticking with pre-K to 6. Can you
Yep.
describe what the remote official WSLRLP,
Yeah.
can we come up with some kind of a good acronym for that doesn't look like slurp? But describe what that day would look like for those basically elementary school-aged kids.
So I think let's go back to, we've used a second grade example a couple times. It could be a middle school math class. I mean, it's going to be all virtual online with an assigned teacher who will come in and provide some synchronous meetings, which you've already experienced via Zoom and Google Meet, assigned work. It will be a full school day. It needs to be a full school day. The teacher will be starting the day and then sending them away to do work. Like I'm going to leave my screen on. You're going to step away and do your reading, do your journal work, and I'm going to bring you back when you hear the bell. Come back in 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll process together. It will have homework. It's a longer day, and it's going to be the best that they can provide with the students that are assigned to them.
All right. How about, I had a parent asking about whether or not lesson plans and materials, syllabus, things like that might be provided to parents just maybe a little bit more than happened in the spring, because there are going to be those off days where the parents are trying to help them move through that.
So the away day is really an important day where you have to realize it will feel different for you. And one of the reasons, I'll just say again, I don't want people to think I'm being flip about this. It's why we recommended some in-person return, which is parents are not teachers. We had plenty of parents who did an amazing job partnering with our teachers. Our goal is to shift you back to monitor, not instructor. So the day will feel different for you because your child will have been in front of their teacher the day before. And the work they're bringing home might be in their backpack, and they don't have to get online at all. And they might hop on and interact with a peer. Their away day would be more supported. And yes, we will send it home with good information for you to shift back to a better monitor phase, where you can assume that 1, they saw their teacher the day before, and 2, they will see them the next day.
Okay. For that remote specific program, how will assignments be handed in and evaluated?
So the remote model, and again,
Again, I'm talking about the elementary. We're focused on
okay,
K through 6.
So those in the standalone remote, we'll have a Westborough teacher who's going to collect their work and grade it using Westborough standards and submit it. And that day, that student has to have as long a day as the student who's come back in the hybrid model.
And how are you going to ensure that those students who've chosen that feel integrated with their schools. So I have a parent concerned, like, will their child actually feel like they're part of the school? Will they hear from their principals? Will there be any entire grade community building efforts? And I guess maybe that question kind of applies even more than just
because that's
pre-K through
everybody.
6.
That's all of
everybody,
us. I
right.
mean, every child wants
This was
that.
asked by an elementary school parent, but sure.
Yeah, for everyone. Of course, because, I mean, kind of love and affection takes over, right? Like, I mean, these are people that are in this industry because they want children to grow. They want them to be happy. They want them to thrive. They're suffering. We are all suffering. Could you pick a worse experience to be going through? I mean, if there's opportunities, of course, our principal notices are going to come to you, whether you're in standalone or together. And if there's ways to bring people together, if they do an all-school assembly, of course, you can zoom in. Like, we're going to try to build that community. We have to get into a model that we can be living in, and then the natural improvements will take over. And that's, I think, the best we can say right now, because all of those versions will be designed by teachers who are thoughtful and caring to try to create the best authentic Westborough public school experience for those children. And there will be losses. I think everyone has to understand there are going to be losses for faculty, for families, for students. We're going to do the best we can.
Mm-hmm. For the online classes, I know we don't have the numbers yet because there's so many pieces that need to fall in place. But do you have a sense for how big you'd prefer those online classes be? So, and this person's also wondering, will there be small online group sessions or one-on-one sessions with their class teacher? And will the teacher be experienced in teaching the Westborough Public Schools curriculum for that year? Like, are we going to have a third grade teacher teaching kindergarten? How would that work?
So some of that, all of those pieces, I mean, we're going to design the best application of Westborough standards that we can manage. I think the goal is to look at how that trajectory, like if you go back to the examples we used earlier, let's say, you have only 10 kindergartners in district who want to do that, and you have a cohort of first graders, and you could blend them if you had to. If you got the best teacher in there and we're going to put somebody in front of them that is K1 certified, might be a good plan. We'd have to wait and see. The goal is to match staffing. I think we'll probably have a general cluster of cohort per grade level where we'll have to have like 1K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, I think there will be that. We'll just have to wait and see, and we'll match staff to students.
Another parent was just asking, can email capability be given to those K through 6 students so that they may communicate directly with teachers and classmates? So I don't know if, do the students at younger grades not have an email maybe?
Any student who gets an email in the regular design, usually I think it's 4th grade where we assign emails. Sorry, I should know this. I think it's 4th grade. Families that select that standalone model are Westborough Public School families. And they'll, of course, have their email. The teachers that are teaching them will have access to all of the PD, the tools, the information, their principal, their colleagues that they have. They're just working differently. Okay. There's losses in that, and there's gains in it. So, we'll see.
All right, I'm moving on to Gibbons in the high school.
Okay.
I had a parent write in saying, I've had conversations with parents who have middle school and or high school students who are under the impression that students will be staying in one classroom all day with the same students all day. Their teachers will rotate teaching spaces. Could you please address this so there's clarity for these families?
So there's a couple discussions. That's a great question. So right now, there's very, very involved discussion going on, again, between the teachers. We're asking them to give us guidance for what model they think makes sense, because we're looking at the different tensions between how many kids teachers come across and how much kids are moving. So they were looking at, could they create some block scheduling where students would have a longer block but not move as much? Could they see their teacher once a week in that rotation as opposed to 2? So they were looking at a whole array of options. In the design right now, you have students who would be moving from class to class. In some cases, a specialist might be able to come to that class. So we're looking in a general way, like at Gibbons, they have smaller pods already because they're in teams. You have some natural controls there to work with. Whereas at the high school, you have a much bigger building and you have fewer students at hybrid, but you're still looking at kids moving. And so currently there's like 3 versions of scheduling methodologies that they might use to try to limit the way cohorts would move. I don't think at Gibbons or the high school that students would be in one class all day. But the question is, can they get to a place where they could modify it a little bit? I think that they also feel like there's teachers arguing that they really want to see their kids twice if they're going to bring them in for a hybrid model, but that we could manage releasing kids through the rotation of the hallway with a little bit different. Like they'd rather see them twice, but have a couple kids come in like in a couple minutes spread to get into their class, moving through the hallways differently. So we're taking those organic ideas and we'll design that schedule. The ultimate goal is best instructional opportunities in the hybrid while you're there, but limiting movement.
And to be clear, the pre-K through 6 kids will be staying in the same classroom all day.
Yeah, that's the typical plan that we're looking at right now, where the specialist would come to the art teacher would come to you. Again, that's the starting place of the model, and then we're asking teachers to look at that finalization with us. I think right now that's their current best planning.
Okay. I have a parent who's concerned that their incoming 9th grader will not have an in-person orientation at the high school. Is it possible to provide at least a walkthrough for those kids who maybe have some anxiety about going into a school they haven't been in before?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I still get lost at the high school, so I totally understand that. I'm getting better. The kids are really good to me. They know when I look lost. They just come up and, where are you going? Yeah, I think, of course, like we've done some virtual and we've done some on-site, and we'll probably provide a combination. The first charge for the high school team was to do graduation, and that was a huge undertaking. And so, I'm giving them a couple days to like maybe not have to put a major orchestrated plan in place. But of course, we'll do some manageable orientation, and I would imagine it would provide some socially distanced opportunities for kids to get a walkthrough.
Great. Will students be using lockers at the high school or Gibbons?
I think that's up for discussion. I think their thinking right now is no. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't evolve towards that and then just rotate how kids go out to them. I think I'll have to defer to the team. That's a granular piece that I don't know the answer to.
Okay. All right. I'm going to ask about a couple of things about hybrid, specifically at Gibbons. How will foreign languages and off-team classes work?
So they would go to those, and that is a transition where we're looking at. That's why we don't want to say, you can't get a complete lockdown of students in one class when you get to that level of transition.
We're working on that. So here's another one. And there were a few people kind of concerned about whether the students choosing that WSRLP are kind of on their own once they choose that option. So feeling like they're going to end up on an island without support from the school. Now, some of those at this is a middle school question. At the middle school, we'll have middle school teachers teaching them, correct?
Yeah, and a combination at the high school as well, depending upon how many faculty are unable to return. So they won't feel alone. It's going to feel different, but it's going to feel different for everybody. So.
Will the curriculum and pace be about the same between hybrid and the standalone?
That's the goal. I mean, the DESE has been clear, teach a year and teach a full day. So that call is pretty intense, and I think everyone's adjusting to that picture.
We have a lot of people who want to know about honors math at the middle school and at the high school. And kind of, again, at the high school, you're dealing with AP. But will they still be available as usual, and are they going to be taught with teachers with the right experience or with experience in those?
Yeah, I think both Jack and Brian at this point feel that honors will be provided across all our models.
We had someone who was asking, they were looking at the VHS website and wondering, do they have various levels at VHS?
They do. They offer AP, honors, and a whole array of rigorous instruction. I mean, VHS serves students who often have a glitch in their schedule. Parents might not know this, so I'll just answer. VHS is an active design model that we've had at the high school for a very long time, and it fills gaps for students who want a certain type of experience and they want to personalize it, and they have a gap in their schedule, and it helps them fill it. Sometimes we have kids that are high achievers who want to double or triple down. You know, they want to take another science, so they're adding those. Or the section was full, and so they got bumped. So it's been a place that we're comfortable as a part of the high school routine, and so we feel confident we can implement that.
For the hybrid, for those AP and honors courses, is that going to be modified curriculum, given that it's 2 people a week? I mean, sorry.
Two contacts?
2 days a week, you know, that they're in
It's not
school.
2 days a week, it's 5. So I want to make sure that everyone gets off the meeting here tonight that realize your life is changing. School will open and it's 5 days a week. And I don't want to be harsh, and if I'm saying that in a way that people feel like I'm offending them, I'm sorry, but your child's gone to school 5 days a week, and it's hard when they're with us 5 days a week. That's why we're all happy when Friday comes. It's 5 days a week, and whatever level course they're in and whatever those expectations are, they're going to work on close or away to the level of expectation of the course load. And that might guide you that you might opt out of an honors level class if you know that that means in a hybrid model. Again, most of our honors level students are pretty competent. They fall into some of that third group who can kind of learn wherever, and they'll push themselves, but they will cover the year's content.
For a student who'd have to be out on quarantine for 2 weeks and is in the hybrid plan, what would that look like? And would they be able to Zoom into the class at all, or they would?
Well, they would be able to, I mean, again, I think I'll defer to the individual implementation of the teacher. I mean, we have a routine. A teacher has a responsibility to provide sub work and support to a student who's out. We do that all the time. We have kids out for getting the flu or traveling or, you know, I think that, again, most students, if they're home because of a contact, will get a test and return closer to 4 to 5 days, and they would just handle that as regular sub work. If they're sick, they're not going to do work, they're sick. And when they're well, we'll help them make up work, just like we've done for every student who gets mono or breaks a leg. So we have protocols in place for that are normal practice for us, and whoever their course load people are, they would handle it with them.
So I know we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, although it's been a couple hours. So I'm going to revisit because some people are asking it online also. But
yeah.
So about the high school students and having to commit to a VHS solution for the whole year.
Yeah.
I'll read you the question from one person. I chose hybrid because I didn't feel like there's a good option for my upcoming 9th grader. I prefer fully remote for her, but I don't think a commitment to a full year of VHS will be good for her. She's a student who needs to build relationships with her teachers. Is it possible to reconsider full remote learning with WHS teachers? I want the best possible outcome, but does the risk outweigh her health? Which we're all grappling with. But kind of along those lines, people were just wondering about the choosing VHS versus kind of a robust remote plan for those high school students.
So, you know, we have faculty and we have students. We have 4,000 students, and we have faculty that serve those 4,000 students. They're going to be pushed out to different areas of service to serve those students. And then we've talked a little bit about this. You know, I think the high school will have a combination of VHS and Westborough High School teachers, but we have kids right now who take VHS without a high school teacher because that's what fit in their schedule. And it's going to have to drill down to what matches the staff we have and what's possible, because then we're just trading differences. If I pull staff off of the hybrid model to put them in the standalone, then I have to get a sub for those teachers, and then those students are then having a different experience. So we have to create the best balanced experience for all students that are making a selection for this year. And I think it's important for all of us to say this is not for the rest of our life, and it is not for the rest of your child's trajectory. And I'm assuming that this is going to be a really hard, long year, and that we're all hopeful that we'll be in a place where, with a vaccine cycle or whatever cycle puts in front of us, we'll design next year in the future. But I want you to have a good, strong experience. But for high school students that do the standalone, it will be a combination of Westborough High School teachers and VHS.
Okay, I think that clears up some confusion, because I think there are definitely people, based on the questions I'm getting, that think if they choose the fully remote option, that they won't have any Westborough High School teachers.
It really depends on how many teachers are unable to return, and and then what the class sizes are when we divide them into cohorts and we develop a schedule. Hence the urgency for people to put some choice down, because you can't build a high school schedule, you can't do staff assignments, and you can't take the next steps unless we have people that make a choice. Karen, you had another question in there, though. It was just kind of going back to this, like, why do you have to choose? And I just want to clarify, and we said it in the beginning, and somebody might have missed it. We do not think you should be hopping back and forth between these models, but the state allows you to change. We will ask you to change at a reasonable transition of grading period or vacation. And the state gives us the authority to slow the window of your transition to meet the needs of getting you into a proper schedule, not giving a teacher a different student day by day when they have a lot on their plate. And so it meets in the middle that if you need to change, you will be allowed, but it needs to transition at a proper time that we will work on with you. So, and again, it's also not for your whole life, it's for the year, and we will recoup. But families will be able to move.
A couple of questions about, one is about cost for VHS. Is the district going to have to pick up the cost for those VHS classes, and is it significant?
Is
how we're going to pay for that? For VHS classes.
So the combination of that will be, for example, let's say a core for that standalone is math, science, English, social studies, your child's taking a foreign language. If we can't provide a teacher that's going to cover that, then if you have a VHS option, then we pay for that option. And if you want to fill your kid's dance card with 5 or 6 other classes, you'll pay for them. So it's a balance that's always existed around VHS. VHS for students, if we had to place them in it, most families are paying for that option. And then in some cases, we have paid for seats. So that practice is the same as it's always been.
How about the standalone? So you mentioned VHS does have different grade levels for classes you can take. So in other words, they have honors level, they have AP level. Do they have levels beneath honors that they offer at VHS?
Yeah, they don't just provide an honors online.
Okay. So you'd be signing up for the level that's appropriate for your student.
Yeah, like they offer, and let's say sometimes we've had a kid who wanted to pick up a foreign language and they need to go back and pick up the cycle. So they'll start at French 1, beginner French. It's not an honors level, it'll be an entry level. They do then offer honors levels in some cases as you go up the system. So yeah, they've got a nice array.
Okay. Do we have any concern, this person wants to know, any assurance that online vendor can scale their services to meet a large influx of students?
I like the 2 words you led with. What were they? Concern and what? Just say concern and anxiety. Welcome to life right now. I feel like I should tattoo those on my forehead. The list of unknowns is as long as the list of solutions. So I believe that scalability exists, and they've certainly been clear. They're probably pretty psyched with how much money they're going to make.
You already answered that. Sorry, you've answered a couple of these.
You're doing great, Karen.
Oh, great. How about science labs and tests conducted for students in that standalone plan?
In the standalone plan?
Yeah. So
they end up being virtual labs. I mean, I think, again, they've hosted AP, biology. They have all sorts of coursework. And it's taught by other high school educators. Like, we have teachers who teach in VHS because that's how you get your free seats. So, again, it's high school teachers providing their craft, and there's guidelines for the ways they do virtual labs and different things for students.
So I had a student who wrote in asking about being concerned about VHS not really having some of the electives that she was looking to take, and wondering about how she might end up taking those if she goes remote. specifically digital photography and drawing. And
She won't get to take those.
Right.
I mean, I hate to say that, but you're not going to get to take those. You could do them as an independent study on your own and use your own student advocacy to explore something you're passionate about. It might not be a course, and if there's a way to work with students to design that into an independent study for credit, the high school's pretty much game on when they can be to help people. But, there will be losses. So I just think it's an important reality.
Kind of along the lines of some of the electives, how about a decision about band, orchestra, chorus, and kind of that goes for, even Mill Pond, but some of those being offered to students.
So
do
the
they
music
still participate
department,
if they choose standalone?
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. I just wanted to ask the person's question.
Go
So
ahead.
they wondered, has a decision been made about students participating in those if they choose standalone?
So I think the version of what all of that music delivery will look like, for example, they've been clear that the state will define the guidelines for band. Like, you're not going to get together into a large band. They might do outdoor band. I mean, marching band's going to be very popular this year, but there are certain things which we won't be able to provide. They'll be playing their instruments at home, and they will be doing virtual kind of content learning when they're together. It's going to be modified, but we will provide coursework, and the music department and fine arts department is game on for all those modifications. If there are ways for students in the standalone to fold into that, they will, but that would be defined based upon who's where and what's possible. We've been clear that a teacher working in that hybrid model is not going to be responsible to find all the ways to pick up all the students in that remote learning. That's just too much. But when we can find overlaps that are allowable, we will.
I'm going to jump to guidance. How and when will remote students access guidance counseling to understand remote course selection and confirm remote course selection meets their graduation requirements?
That's a great question. So once everybody's plugged into a model, guidance people will meet the needs of those students as they should to answer their questions around transcript and requirements and assignments and their schedule against their trajectory of their planning. So they're talking right now about how to do that in the best way, and they're in these planning meetings as well, and so they will definitely fulfill that expectation.
Okay. And do you think that VHS on a transcript will have a negative impact on college admissions?
I think the colleges are just as blown up as we are, so guess what? They'll be lucky to still be in existence like everyone else. So I don't mean that in a flip way. They're just going to be happy to get their feet back under them as well. I don't believe that your VHS would in any way hurt you. What's important is that you do well in the experience you have and you speak articulately about your choices and your outcomes. And Westborough students are incredibly good at that, so I have confidence in you.
I have another question asking, will considerations be given to seniors in regard to keeping their same guidance counselor? People are just worried about their college planning.
Oh, no, we're worried about your college planning, too.
Sure.
And I want to be reaffirming to you that we're worried about everybody. I mean,
Sure.
all of you, we care about you. We're trying to get the best thing in place. What can I say? I never wanted to lead through anything like this. It's very, very hard, you guys. Your guidance counselors, your assignments for college will be right there with you guys. We will be with you. We will be talking with you. We'll be meeting with you both virtually and distanced. I imagine many guidance counselors will be sitting outside in a chair with you guys making plans. So they're as worried for you and about doing their job as you are about getting their help. So please know that we'll be there with you along the way.
Awesome. Kind of along the lines of guidance, we had a couple people who asked about maybe they selected to be in chorus or band or orchestra coming up from 8th grade to 9th grade and now wanting to switch their elective course. Is there a process by which they could do that still?
I mean, we have a natural add drop process anyway, but I would say if they're feeling like if they've made a decision to do a certain model, they can just send an email and just,
indicating that up to the high school. So, can you clarify a situation with orchestra at Mill Pond for 6th graders? Are they going to have it?
We will provide every piece of course experience. It will be done differently. I mean, playing in a socially distanced model for orchestras more available than band because the wind instruments you're blowing in them, so that's not allowed. But students wearing masks with the same, again, you're going to be in a hybrid model, half as many kids, socially distanced, we will playing our string instruments, yes.
Go into a little bit of EDP and childcare. We don't have that much more here, but
Yeah.
EDP, will there be EDP?
Yes. Brian Bacon was just texting me. That's why I was looking. I want to give a shout out to Brian Bacon, the director of EDP, who is so game on to step up and provide the TeamWorks purchase that he made for the year, contract-wise, to provide for staff. And then if there's any available space, it will be made available to them.
That's great. So will you answer a couple questions about that?
Yep.
So for those teachers or parents, if there are available spots who have to work and need care, can you outline what the district's done for them and kind of expected capacity over at TeamWorks and programs and price and things like that? And whether there'd be transportation. A couple of people asked about that.
Sure, I'm just reading his notes.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we put in place the TeamWorks purchase. It can take 250 students socially distanced. It's a giant space with spaces for students to work on their schoolwork, to take socially distanced play breaks, and to be able to have lunch and be able to do what they have to do, following all the parameters of the EDP guidelines, which Brian and his team have implemented this summer during the summer. We were one of the few towns that ran some summer programming. And shout out to, community ed for stepping up and saying, they had the confidence that they have a staff that could do that. And he was just sending me some notes. The staffing support will pick up coverage for Westborough teachers for their children K to 6, and then one group of running a class of 4-year-olds only for Westborough faculty, to give them coverage in place should they select it on the days their children aren't in school. And then within that model of 250 students and the spacing they can do, any spaces left open will be made for drop-in or planned space used by Westborough families. Did I forget a part of that question?
No, transportation?
For teachers or for kids or who?
I guess transportation for the kids to the TeamWorks. Will we be providing
Yeah,
any of
so a
that?
couple of my staff had asked me about that. I mean, parents are really sweet to be asking about teachers' transportation, and somebody's got some good networking. I just keep saying if I can do it, I will, and I told them, it's the Mill Pond staff that are asking that question, and I already told Peter and the staff there, if we can't either get an earlier person over there to let you drop off your Mill Pond kids earlier because you have to get over to Mill Pond, I would just run a shuttle and take your kids from Mill Pond to TeamWorks. So the answer is Mill Pond faculty will be able to access TeamWorks coverage and get to work on time, and whichever of those choices work for you will make it happen.
And I guess for EDP is happening over at TeamWorks also?
No,
Sorry.
EDP, well, I think Brian will figure out a plan.
Okay.
Because EDP happens after those hours. We've only rented the space through the 4 o'clock window. I don't think he rented the space. We basically rent that space and own TeamWorks space from 7:30 to 4. Okay. And so I don't think he rented it for longer than that.
Okay.
So EDP will run in the building-based, spaced
Okay.
plans that it always has.
Okay. And there's some concerns about the program itself, like doesn't this plan potentially undermine efforts to protect students by regularly funneling them back and forth between schools and a program that's outside the school's direct oversight, although you can respond to that.
Well, wait a minute, I'm confused by the question. Help me
Right.
understand what they're asking.
So I think the concern was that the program itself is outside the school's direct oversight, but you can.
You're talking about for our teachers that access it?
For that child care.
I'm confused. Sorry, maybe I'm tired.
That's
All
all right.
right, so let me just break it into 2 pieces, which is Westborough Public Schools has always had a standing relationship with Community Ed, who offers after-school care, EDP, extended day program, summer programming, drop-in. They're a really dynamic program. We've partnered with them. They're kind of like a branch of our work, but independent. And Westborough families who decide that they need after-school care will have it available to them. That does or doesn't mix cohorts. That's Westborough the cohorts for EDP have always been at the building where the kids are. So, you know, if your child needs coverage at the end of the day, extended day, they can have access to it. So I'm not quite sure what mixing they're talking about.
So it's possible that this person didn't understand that the school actually does have direct oversight of that program.
Well, we have oversight. They run independently of us, but we have oversight in the fact that in all the ways they access our building as an organization we collaborate with, they have to follow our guidelines. So Brian functions as a colleague who calls, and we make a plan, and he's an employee that has an extended opportunity to run his independent program. So he functions kind of like on his own. He designs stuff. He called me like, I'm going to rent Teamworks. You want to do that? Let's make it work. Talk to school committee. But it had to overlap. So it's kind of like a loosely coupled relationship. But they're Westborough kids. So the cleaning protocols have to be in place, the socially distanced plans. Same thing he's running in the summer school programming. And that's a family choice if they want to access that.
I'm going to talk just a little bit about mental health for our students.
Sure.
And, you know, parent writes in, research tells us children and teenagers under chronic stress and trauma have difficulty learning and retaining new information. Given this knowledge, how do Westborough schools plan to prioritize and support students' mental health and social emotional needs over academic learning? What overall supports will be put in place for students?
Mm-hmm. So I think, Westborough, we took the social emotional SEL program assessment over the last 2 years and really made I think we've been layering in a whole variety of things over the last several years. And I think the cultural norms of our district, K to 12 or pre-K to 22, are very focused on the whole child focus, both academically and emotionally, and they're intertwined. And so the planning for how we return is automatically inclusive of thinking about the social emotional needs of our students. So if you hearken back to one of my responses, I said academics will come separate. The first thing we're starting is several weeks, 2 weeks, however long it takes to get to a place where a teacher says my kids are ready to have academics put in front of them. We've learned routines, we've built community, we feel good about where kids are. Those are all parts of social emotional responsive planning. Faculty are talking actively about how to manage ramping up the intensities of the school year with, the impacts that will have on students and ways they can mitigate that through making themselves available, counseling groups, different things. We worked with the Bright organization, which is out of Brookline, and we've been members of their groups and professional development for years. I think Brian Callahan sits on their board or something. Like, he's very engaged with that committee, and we knew them years ago. They helped us design our program at the high school Center for Student Success in like the second year I was here, end of second year. In designing that whole framework of meeting the social emotional needs of kids. So the crew methodology, the crew groups that we put in place, all of that will still be in place, like at Gibbons, that group. So everyone's activating their thinking and is part of teacher planning right now.
Excellent. All right, so the last couple of questions that I have on here, although there are some questions people have been sending in, some of the things, just for people to know, we have addressed already. So I think for some people, I know it's long, but if you want to go back, and you could probably just listen to it while you're doing laundry or something to be able to hear some of the answers.
We're so entertaining.
I feel so bad because I know the answers, but if we go over it again, we'll be here another 2 hours. So some of these things are answered earlier in the show, if you will. But I do want to ask a couple of things about when information on Teamworks will be coming out, because there are a few people here who are asking questions.
Yeah, so I understand.
Do we have any idea about a time frame for when people might know what they can count on there?
I think it's a big week for us coming up. I think the next 8 days are going to be important. I think faculty and family are trying to make preliminary decisions of their best sense of how you plan on moving forward, and that will let us define cohorts, make staffing decisions, and then I feel like faculty who have first-tier access to this, it was developed for them, will fill it with their students, and they're going to want to lock in pretty quickly on that. And then we would open up to families right away. I know Brian's texting me right now, and we're going to talk after this and this week to start to look at numbers. I think he's already starting push. I'll probably know by the end of the week where the number of faculty are that want to sign up, and then he'll start pushing to families right away with the number of spaces he has left.
Okay.
So next 2 weeks, I don't know, as soon as possible.
Okay. And also, I know you said the school committee has a meeting on August 12th. Will they be voting on a new school calendar then? And will there be any adjustments to vacations or holidays? Do you anticipate that at this point? I mean, obviously, the start date being September 15th, in case people missed that.
They'll vote the new school calendar. I think it will matter. That's a good question. I mean, a couple pieces. Yes, they'll vote the school calendar. We're trying not to move your world around too much. We understand people need to lock things down, but we're in a lot of active conversations with our faculty to understand what gives them a stabilized sense of best implementation of that hybrid model to return. So I feel like until I finish those conversations with them, there's been discussion about whether or not that virtual day should be a Wednesday or Friday. All these types of things are finalized as soon as possible. And if it involved school committee making a new vote, we would bring it forward as a recommendation. We're trying to keep it as stable as possible for both faculty, students, and families.
A couple more things. Can remote learners participate in sports?
If we have them.
Okay. That's the answer we have right now. What about, can you just speak a little bit about fails? Because I know some people with the construction going over there, it's a little bit of a special case scenario. I know that that's in the document, but a little bit on the outdoor space that's available there, that there is space. I know I've read about this.
There is space, and I think Marion and I will push out, specific communication to fails. They've opened up a big section of that blacktop area, and they definitely will be supporting, breakout areas for play. I mean, it's a construction zone, but I also think we have a really good company. I think Marianne is pretty amazing, and the team's working together. I think the play space will feel adequate. We'll also be looking at other different places to create some mask breaks and things. So I'd say she and I will send a separate communication, but I want to be clear that blacktop area was increased in size. So it's bigger than what you remember because they extended it so that we could have more open play space and we could bring some play equipment up there. So it will be bigger.
Okay. In the older grades.
And you're talking about half the number of kids. I just have to keep reminding you.
Yeah.
You're talking about half the number of students. So that takes care of a lot.
Sure. Kind of back to the half and thinking about hybrid, will students be sharing desks and talking about at the high school? So if you had a classroom, I know you were talking about spacing out the desks, but if you have a classroom where you've got Cardinal team there one day and Navy team, there the next day.
I imagine that they'll mark them.
Okay.
Again, I think.
I know you said they're going to be cleaning them down.
They get disinfected
every day,
anyway with
the
misters and many people wiping them down, by choice in classroom, but we'll miss them, and then the touch points will be cleaned. I think, though, that it depends on how they can space out their room and how much furniture they have in there, so I don't want to offer guarantees. I don't know how they're going to handle it. I see that as a teacher-based decision. We will meet the cleaning standard for a student to come in and share a desk, but I imagine teachers might assign them.
Okay. I have a couple more things from a few people. Will seniors, so I asked, but I'm not sure we answered it, but would the seniors, upcoming seniors, I know we're all worried about them, making sure that this year works out for them and they get their college applications done if that's the route they're taking. Will they remain with the same guidance counselors, or is that a request?
That's my understanding, but never say never. I also have ones leave. So, right now we're not planning on rotating those. I haven't heard a thing from Ross Wolf, the head of the department, Ross Wolfson, that we would be changing those.
Great. And we have a few questions again about grading, because they're coming in, but grading for remote learners, people will be getting grades. There'll be no pass-fail. It will be according
grades.
You've answered this already, but
grades.
Yes. So official grades on
official
the
grades following Westborough standards on a more typical length of work and span of year, yes.
Great. And then a couple of people asking, again, about kind of what it's going to take to shut schools down, and just to reiterate to people who didn't watch earlier, but that will be done in coordination with the Board of Health.
definitely active talks with our nurses, a daily report on metrics around, any indicated concerns of COVID, any tests, any other things coming out of that, with a protocol clearly followed and fully transparent to the public and guided by the Board of Health, who has ultimate authority over telling us what to do.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to focus on the last couple of questions here before we wrap up. But people being concerned about the staff, and they're near and dear to my heart. I know they are to yours also, and obviously to our parents, given that that people are asking some questions. But kind of just the overall concern. There was some buzz about kind of the union being distressed about it. Obviously, the MTA came out last week with their concerns about in-person learning. And so just a little bit for parents on or staff that might be watching on kind of what that process is going to be to get teachers back in the school. And
so great questions. So we have a very typical and well-grounded and collaborative and intense relationship with unions based upon topics that are intense. It's not the relationships that are intense, it's the topics, right? So I just want to clarify, we're in lots of conversations with the labor board, and the labor board is carrying forward the voice of its faculty and concerns they have, and there's a full bell curve of those feelings and those impressions. And so I think it's a robust conversation, and I don't think it's a bad conversation. I think it's one we have to iron out our planning, and I think we're trying to draw upon the conversation. Like I said, today I was in a Gibbons planning meeting and then in the high school planning meeting, and they were really intense conversations, and I think that's okay. They're not bad. It's just a hard topic, and we're trying to find our way. So the union is working and doing exactly what it has to do, which is helping us to understand the feedback around the direction they feel represents their unit, and their unit is a bunch of individuals, and those individuals have lots of needs and feelings. So it's both an individual process and a group process. I believe that Westborough has a highly professionalized staff that is very much committed to working with students, and they do not have any desire not to make a good plan. We also, on the other hand, really care about everyone's safety, and it's all about mitigating risks and doing the job we need to do. And I said to faculty today, all industries that are a face-to-face industry have had to find their way back to work to manage the appropriate balance of their safety and a variety of protocols to do their job. And I recommended hybrid, following the guidance of all sorts of people other than just me. It's not me just dreaming it up, based upon recognizing that we are a profession that's face-to-face and that some contact with students is necessary in order to drive instruction forward this year. Hence the hybrid discussion. That doesn't come lightly by me, and it doesn't come without anxiety, but I also believe that there is no such thing as zero risk in life and in any given day. We have people that come to school with peanut allergies every day who have to trust that we're not going to cause them anaphylactic shock, and we mitigate those options and build trust. This is kind of one of those examples, and we're trying to do that. But I want to reassure our parents that these are very serious conversations, and protecting our staff and setting up a doable model is what we're all invested in.
All right, thanks for those answers. I guess I'm going to end with two things. One is that someone suggested, Laura DeCoste, I think, an acronym of RAP, which is, I think, Westborough Remote Academic Program. So
I like that one better. I'll text that to Dana.
We might do that.
It's I like that.
We're going to have to footnote her, but that's better than W slurp. That's,
hey, look, we are functioning under pressure here, people. We just had to.
We are. We're gonna smile, even though this is a heavy topic. But yes, I think that's something we can wrap our arms around. I made that joke. I did.
Like it.
This is important for people who might be watching and are wondering if you haven't responded yet with your choice for the year. it's time to do so.
Yeah.
And if this changed your mind, you've already responded, you can go back in and resubmit a different answer, I believe. Amber can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I would gather your name again against the current date. And if it says one only, then you just have to email and let us know. I have to talk to my data architect about that.
Right.
I'm not sure.
I just want to make sure it's clear to people that they should respond tonight, and they should, if they've changed their mind, the answer is to go back in there and respond again.
Yes.
So just in case, because a couple of people were wondering about that. They've responded earlier and they have a different view now.
No, I understand that. And I do, again, I think we covered earlier, Karen, like there are opportunities for transitions. I mean, we might be forced to transition again. We've said it multiple times. This is our best entry point proposal, and we might all be moving around in different models. And so, we've been clear that there will be opportunity for transition times. We're going to work to make every model as viable as it can be, and all of them have pros and cons. And in order for us to open the district, you need to check a box, because we can't do the planning we have to do. I can't help answer your questions unless you give me guidance around your best entry point.
All right. Well, another thing to note is people were sending us questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. I tried really hard. But we did have questions that the administration will have. Some of them are questions, some of them are answers, some of the questions lead to suggestions.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's both in the form itself, and some of you were also doing that on the YouTube page. So I just want to assure people that we see those, we have those. I say we, it's Amber, it's not me. I just was asking the questions. Right. But it's, the administration that will be looking at
and
those.
I guess if there's anything, while I happen to have a lot of people watching, is I have 680 email right now, and I'm doing my best to answer them, but I cannot find the time right now in looking at the magnitude of decision I get worried about not providing a thoughtful email back to you, or not personal, or somehow like, oh, she just dashed this off. It just makes me feel really trapped. So I'm trying to dig out of email. I will. It just swamps me quickly. And it does for all of our faculty. So please be thoughtful in how you send them. We're really working forward as fast as we can. But the questions you're providing, we'll look at them. They pool around things we've heard, and we're not ignoring you. But if there's a need for us to do another frequently asked question sheet, we will. But, at this point, I think we're going to pull in everything we have. We're going to focus on faculty. This is a discussion for faculty to decide with us and with school committee, to make then the school committee vote how this district will open, and families will receive what we put in place. And I think it's important that while you have feelings about it, I respect those feelings, but it's going to be what the faculty and the school committee and the teams decide how the district will open. And then you'll receive what we can put together. And I want it to be as good as it can be, as does our faculty. But it is their voice right now, which we are going to navigate to make sure that we have places to place everybody and to dig in. So thank you for the time, Karen. I just want to give a shout out to you for being on the hot seat to pull all those questions together. And I didn't feel grilled, so I really appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody who sent questions and took time to sit with us and listen. And nobody chose this, so you need to keep a kind heart on all of this. It really is essential to try to hold on. People are tired, and so you get short emotionally, and I'm not lecturing you. I'm just saying that we all have to take a breath. I have to take it too. We all just have to try to take steps forward. So thank you, and we'll keep moving.
Sounds good. I'm going to just reiterate a couple things, which is that just even going through the questions today and trying to categorize them. So when I was asking Amber if we weren't all over the place, because obviously the questions came in all over the place, I found even trying to sort through the questions overwhelming. Sorry. And that's just sorting through the questions. Yeah. It wasn't coming up with any answers.
Yeah.
So when you think about that and the number of massive decisions that have to be made, it can be somewhat overwhelming. And I just want to say that from our community and a lot of the people who wrote in questions and the chatter that I've heard on Facebook and with friends, that we're just really, I would say for parents, and I will speak for them, really grateful to live in a town where we have a school system that consists of so many caring and hardworking and amazing faculty and staff and administrators. Like, we really know that you're trying to work with us, and so I will speak for everyone by saying that that gratitude is deep and felt throughout the community. And while everybody's trying to come to answers for some really difficult topics, so I thank you and your entire team and all of your faculty for that. Good luck in the rest of your planning.
Thank you. Yeah.
And this will be available if people want to back up and watch some of what they might have missed. They can back up. It will also be available to view on Westborough TV going forward. I know for tonight, though, you can back up the YouTube taping and watch it if you want to back up to the beginning. And that's all. And Amber, we'll see you again on August 12th.
August 12th, school committee will hold a meeting, and we'll get, probably we'll send out an updated plan proposal to people for how it's evolving based upon some of the stuff we've talked about. But thank you to everybody, and we'll be in contact again soon. So thanks.
All righty.